The UPSC CSE arena is an ever-evolving space where staying up to date becomes as crucial as maintaining a thorough preparation. With strategic planning and holistic coverage for exam syllabus, Vision IS Delhi presents GS Foundation course. Avail analysis and integration of current affairs with GS syllabus. All India test series with an innovative assessment system, inculcating post-test analysis, discussion, All India ranking, and more. Explore the holistic learning modules intrinsically designed for the ideal aspirant.
All right, so good evening, everyone. My name is Ranchan, and I am going to be taking this session. This session is on the art of effective answer writing. Now, there was this one quote when I was very, very young. If you have heard of this book, I'm sure most of you have. Have you heard of this book called Wren and Martin? How many? How many of you have heard of this book called Wren and Martin? This is an English grammar ka book. Very, very famous book. No? Some of you? I remember in Wren and Martin, much like most of the grammar books, the last few sections used to be on précis writing, paragraph writing, essay writing, letter writing. There was a quote in this book. The quote said, "Writing is an art. It comes by practice, not by chance, as those can walk easily who have learned to dance." I remember I was in standard 4th or 5th by the time. It amused me particularly, so it has stuck with me since then. It says, "Writing is an art, it comes by practice, not by chance, as those can walk easily who have learned to dance." And I remember I could not dance, but I could walk. Right? I thought, bad analogy. But one thing which is important was this aspect. Writing is an art. When I was very, very young, my father would randomly come from his office and he would give me a topic to write on. Standard 5th is when I started, and I have written almost every day. I would write a paragraph on things like a cricket match that you witnessed, right? On a certain bird, on a certain mountain. I mean, somebody who is in standard 4th or 5th will not have a lot of complicated ideas, so he's not going to write on philosophical things, quite obviously. Basic things that you would observe, and my father would make me write. I was in standard 10th. Standard 10th, there was this competition organized by SARC itself. This competition was about writing a letter to Mahatma Gandhi, posthumously, of course. Now he's dead. You have to write a letter to Mahatma Gandhi, and you have to urge for world peace, or what you are seeing around you. How, like, what do you envision the world to be? How could we make the world a better place? Now, in our schools, a small town that I come from, it's not like, oh, there is a selection or a screening process first and then you are sent to a certain competition. It was a writing competition. There was a prize associated with it. So the principal came to our class. He's like, you know what, this is a writing competition organized by SARC. This is not in, I mean, it is international, but of course like a subset of various countries. Do you want to participate? Now, because it's a writing competition, no hands were raised except for me and a couple of other people. Now, the other persons, they got their parents to write this letter because the topic had been discussed previously. They got their parents to write it. I just showed up to the competition and then we wrote whatever we wrote. It was a 1,000-word letter we had to write, and in standard 10,000 words are daunting. We wrote this, and a couple of months later, the principal comes to our class. He's like, oh, you know what, one of our students has done us proud. She's a female, right? So you can say, let's clap for our females, this and that. Then he goes, oh, the name is Ranchan Call. And he was looking at the females. No female would rise up, but there was a boy standing in the last rows. That was me. And he, of course, it was a humorous moment. But I remember I won that competition. Now, when I won that competition, I figured I had read a lot of literature written by my friends' parents, and I thought that is particularly more exciting than one I wrote. I did not have great vocabulary, quite obviously. I did not write complicated things, and yet I won because I wrote in my language. I probably understood it to be also the same case for the examiner. When the examiner is looking at this letter, he would have a certain expectation of what a standard 10th student is going to write. He's not going to be writing complicated words like dehyphenation, decolonization, and all complicated words. A standard 10th candidate, you do not expect such words to be coming out of them, or complicated philosophical points. Maybe that was the deciding factor. Maybe that's why they gave it to me. I won some bunch of rupees, multiple, and I also won like a Philately ka proper, like India mein jitni posts hain, sari ki sari mujhe mili. Great moment for me. So my confidence in writing was built early on. When I came to my college, BITS Pilani is where I studied, because a lot of people come to BITS Pilani. The person who was in the side room, like I was 311, 312, he was from Kerala. Now, because he was from Kerala, he would not speak Hindi. And because I am from Jammu and Kashmir, right, I would not be very comfortable talking in English. Now, you can make me write in English and I can write whatever. My articulation is great. But my speaking is not, it's not near perfect. It's not, I would say, it's not even operational for that matter. I cannot articulate myself. That made me realize two things. One, that writing is a skill in itself. Speaking is a skill in itself. Which is to say, I may be good at writing. I may have won competitions. My English scores have been better than decent. But I still do not know how to speak to somebody who cannot or who is not very comfortable talking in a separate language or in language that I know. Right? So it took me time. I would urge this person to speak to me normally, thoda slowly, so I could get a hang of. I could understand everything that he said, but I could not articulate myself. So in my head, sentences were in Hindi, which I had to translate to English, and then I had to express those sentences rather slowly so he would get it. Eventually, I worked on that because I had to interact with a lot of people who came from the Northeast, from the south of India. So you had to speak in English. So eventually it got better. One thing you have to understand is both writing and speaking are skills, which is to say, you may not necessarily be born with these, but if you practice hard enough, you are going to get better. Now, writing particularly is very, very important for the sake of civil services examination. Why is writing very important for CSE? One, that CSE has 3 stages. It has a preliminary test stage, followed by the main examination, followed by what is called the personality test. Now, personality test is about articulation, but verbal. While main exam is about articulation, the same thing, but written. And preliminary test is about neither of those. Preliminary test is about 2 things, your knowledge and your ability to navigate through objective type questions, whether you can find a way to discover the answer then and there itself or not. Now, amongst each of these 3 stages, this is your first stage. What that means is that only those people who clear the preliminary test get to write the main examination. The importance of preliminary test is only this. It is a filtering mechanism, which is to say, roughly around 13 lakh candidates fill the form, roughly around 5 lakh candidates appear for the preliminary test, and at best about, depending upon the number of vacancies, 15 to 17,000 candidates clear the preliminary test who get to write the main examination. The importance of preliminary test is extinguished here itself. After you are done with the preliminary test, the scores therein are not going to matter. If the cutoff was 74, and if you scored a 74.1, it really does not matter, right? You are in. You are now going to write the main examination. In the main examination, you have the following exams. I'm only going to talk about the exams which get accounted for. There is General Studies, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of them 250 marks. This is followed by an essay paper. Essay paper also carries 250 marks. Followed by the optional subject. You have paper 1 and paper 2. Each of them is 250 marks. That means 500 in total. Once you write your main examination, depending upon whether the cutoff was, you may either clear it, you may not. After you clear your mains examination, then you sit for what is called your personality test, which is evaluated out of a total of 275 marks. If you look at the aggregate here is 1,000 followed by 250, 1,250 plus 500. This means 1,750. Add to it this score. This gives you a total of 2025. Out of a 2025, whatever your aggregate score is, that decides whether you are a part of that much coveted for PDF or not. In these 2,225 marks, 1,750 are about the mains examination. This is roughly around 86%. 86% of the total score is about one examination where you have to articulate not verbally, but you have to write it down. 275 is about verbal articulation. That means if you are good with writing, right, you have a very high chance of clearing the mains examination and then getting to sit in the personality test. About 86%. I commonly tell most people that if you have ever known any person, any candidate who has repeatedly been writing mains examination or sometimes has even appeared for personality test, most commonly you will find that my interview mein atak gaya. More often than not, it's not the interview which is the deciding factor. More often than not, it is the score in mains. Because if you are a decent candidate, in the interview, your scores will range from about a 165 to a 185, 190 odd. If you are an exceptional candidate, then 185 se lekar 2,215 to 220 also sometimes, right? That is an exceptional case, right? You have to have extraordinary bad luck to be scoring about a 130 odd or a 150 odd. It's not that no person has ever gotten that. People have gotten really terrible marks in personality test too, but those are outliers. More often than not, you will find that candidates typically have scores which fall in a certain range itself. That means the greater deciding factor is your mains examination. Mains examination is all about writing. If you are good with writing, which is to say you may have some content in your head, you may have to find an expression of that content, because what you're going to be evaluated on is not the knowledge that you have. It is what you write on that exam sheet, on that answer script, which is then going to be evaluated by the invigilator. He does not know you personally. He has no idea what your background is. Do you come from a poor background? How much struggle have you had to undergo? If you had to, pledge all your land and you have been in Delhi for 5.5, 6 odd years, no person knows anything about that. The only evidence you are producing of your intellect and your expression is that answer script, where you have attempted a few questions, and those questions are then going to be objectively evaluated by the evaluator, and basis that he's going to give you a certain score. Depending upon where you fall, you may either clear this exam or you may not clear this exam. First thing in your mind you have to remember is this part. Keep this in your mind always. Preliminary test ka importance, it's a necessary evil of sorts. You have to clear a preliminary test to write the mains exam, but the importance gets done and dusted there and then. You have to now focus on writing and verbal articulation, where more importance has to be given to writing, because if you have a great score in your mains examination, then you are pretty much making interviews redundant. A couple of years back, we had an All India rank 1, I think his name was Pradeep Kumar. His interview scores were not exceptional. For a rank 1, I think his interview score was, if I'm not mistaken, 156 or 163, like early 160s, not an exceptional score, but he was All India rank 1. Why was he All India rank 1? Because 86% of the weightage of the aggregate comes from mains examination itself. So here is your chance to make the interview redundant. And you would want to make the interview redundant. Why? Because interview is a lot of things which is not in your control. There's a lot of externalities in the interview process, depending upon what board do you get, right? Who's the chairman on that board? Are you the first candidate in the day? Are you the last candidate in the day? Right? Couple of things that you're wearing, the mood of those people, a lot of things. Persons who went before you, right? All of that is going to be influencing the psyche of this board who is interviewing you. A lot of things, those things are not in your control. So you may have a great day, you may have an average day, you may have a really bad day, right? The reasons were not in your control. Right? So you have to remember, focus on this mains examination. Try to make interview as redundant as possible. Now, because the main examination is about writing, we have to discuss a few things about writing in the first place. What I am going to divide this entire session into is basically two parts. First is the idealism around writing as a process. And the second, more relevant part is the realism of answer writing, specifically for civil services examination. Idealism se mera matlab kya hai? Think of writing as a process. In fact, think of any literature, any piece of writing that you have ever read and that impacted you, that influenced you. And then think of what were the reasons as to why that piece of writing was particularly influential for you. For example, that quote. I have never read that quote again, but I read that quote probably when I was in standard 4th or standard 5th. It has stuck with me, right? Because I found it very humorous then. One, there is a certain ring to it because it rhymes. Second, I found it very, very humorous. Because I found it humorous and I was very young, not a lot of thought in my head. So probably that sentence or that, you can say that phrase has stuck with me. Right? There are multiple reasons when you read something, that piece of writing influences you. We will try to dive down into a few reasons as to you read something, probably a newspaper report, somebody's opinion editorial, you read a book, you read a poem, you read many things. Some things influence you, some things are just about what you millennials may want to call meh. Right? Pad liya. Right? What is the one thing that influences you the most about any piece of literature? Whenever we think about writing or think about things which particularly influenced us, something which we are influenced by a lot is vocabulary, the words which were used. Right? Sometimes the words which are used are exceptional. We have never heard of those words. Some words are really lengthy, complicated. Some words are just funny. Right? Multiple things. Vocabulary is impressive. What else could be impressive? The content is impressive, but when I say content, any piece of writing will have content. What about content makes the content impressive for me? I may say the analysis, right, or the depth of knowledge displayed by the person. Right? Content is not very dense. Right? The length is not really very long, but he has given me enough to work with. I did not know so much about inflation. I did not know so much about how prices work in the free market economy. I did not know so much about communism as a phenomenon. But this person has impressed me with his knowledge. Right? It could be this. What else could be impressive? You may say anecdotes, examples, stories that people use to make the content relatable to me. Right? Some people express meanings through stories. Some people try to really break down a very complicated thing by making use of certain examples, right? Just to make sure that the reader does not fall off the grid. The reader continues to engage with the piece of writing. This could be impressive. What else could be impressive? Anything else that could be impressive in any piece of writing? Typically, it's also about the topic chosen. That should be your first thing. If somebody writes anything about climate change, I automatically do not read. And that's nothing of my interest. I generally do not like to read about climate change at all. Let's say I'm a climate change denier. I don't like climate change. You may have written the best piece on climate change. I'm not going to read this, right? Some people, for example, somebody writes about forensics. I'm particularly interested in forensics or maths, right? Or a story about some mathematician. I'm going to be interested. So the relatability of the topic is also very important. Then you may say how the structure or how the content was structured is also very important. When I say structure का मतलब क्या है? There is one particular quality of the piece of writing which is particularly exciting. That quality is what we call coherence. Coherence का meaning क्या होता है? Coherence, you have to understand it like, if I'm reading a huge piece of literature, at no point while I was reading that piece of literature did I think, where is the writer going? Right? Which is to say, every paragraph is tied to the following paragraph in a logical sequence. He has started from an introduction. The introduction links to the following paragraph. The following paragraph makes a leading case to be discussed in the following paragraph. Each paragraph is logically flowing into the other, and the literature towards the end ends in a decent conclusion. At no point when I was reading that particular text did I ask myself, is he really discussing what the topic was? Where is the writer going? There has to be some coherence. All of the content has to flow into the conclusion logically. That is coherence, right? Structure of the content, very, very important. What else could be exciting about any content? You can say quotes, powerful phrases, yes, quotations. Some people also use powerful pictures. Or you can say generally the symbolism which has been used in that particular piece of writing. That is also very exciting, right? Think about it generally. Something that you read and you felt influenced by it. Like, what was it about that piece of writing that really got my attention, that I am not able to forget it very easily? Vocabulary is very important. Why is vocabulary important? Specifically in a country like India, where English is not our native language, which is, we generally tend to equate some person who has a range of words in his vocabulary to be a smarter person. Right? We think some person who knows a lot of words is automatically a smarter person, while the reality is very divergent. Vocabulary is important. Why? Because words have the power to, you can say, to condense a lot of complicated sentences into a set of, or into a string of alphabets. I used to give, so those people who have taken this session with me previously, I've given an example of this word. It's a Portuguese word. This Portuguese word is saudade. Now, saudade is a word, and it is about melancholy, a state of sadness, but a very specific kind of sadness. This specific kind of sadness is really confusing. Confusing ka matlab kya? Think of a particular person. I gave this example previously also. Think about a person who is probably writing his 6th attempt at IAS exams, right? Has written 5 exams previously, has not been particularly successful. A lot hinges upon it. He's 32 now. He's not married. He has been unemployed for 7 to 8 odd years. He has invested a lot, and he's generally a very studious candidate. It's not like he's reached here through the stroke of luck. He's very, very industrious. is about to write his last examination, writes his last mains examination, clears it, sits for the interview. The results are out. He is all India rank 3. Now he is all India rank 3. It's a moment of jubilation or elation. He immediately calls up his family members. I'm expecting that's the first person you would call up. And his family members tell him of this unfortunate reality that his father has passed away. Now tell me, what is the state of mind of this person? Should he be happy? Should he be sad? I'm sure he should be sad, right? But it's a very, very confusing state because something that he had invested so much on has now borne fruit, but at the same time, he's particularly sad. I also used to give this example of Shah Rukh Khan, who happens to be my favorite Bollywood actor. His life story is very inspiring. Both of his parents could not see him become a star. I don't think his father passed away earlier. His mother passed away before she could see his first release also. And he has become a global superstar of sorts. Right? He's particularly powerful, very, very popular, very, very influential. But there must be course of days in his lifetime where he would think as to how his family could not see him become the person that he has become. Right? He may be happy generally, but he will also have those moments of sadness. It's a very confusing state. Your happiness or your source of happiness also causes certain misery. Right? You are successful, but you long for your parents' touch. You long for your parents to have ever seen you become that successful. Right? Sometimes you may think, oh, is that the reason why I could not pay enough attention to my parents? Oh, what if I had not chosen this profession? Could I have taken better care of my parents or not? Multiple things may go through your mind. It's a very specific kind of melancholy. Now, if you have to write about this specific state, you can write an entire essay on it, describing this exact same feeling. And you can replace that exact essay with a word. The word is Saudat. This is the power of words. Words condense complicated things into a string of alphabets. You do not have to explain a lot of things if you just mention a certain word. Right? This is the power. We are naturally inclined to be impressed by new words that we find, new words which are put in a certain context. That is impressive, of course. So is the analysis and the depth of knowledge. You learn inflation from me. You learn inflation from Raghuram Rajan. There is no comparison. Right? The amount of knowledge Raghuram Rajan is going to bring to the table, I am not in competition. Right? You are going to forget me like you forget your ex. Right? Instantly, I am guessing. Right? Third is anecdotes, examples, stories, makes writing very, very powerful. Topics, relatability of the topic, whether it's of your particular interest or not. Structure, coherence, quotations, pictures, symbols, a lot of things go into writing to make it particularly attractive. That's the idealism of it. One thing that we conveniently forget as aspirants is that we are not here to write essays, or we are not here to write, prose. We are not here to write poetry. We are not writing a research paper. We are not writing for children, right? We are not writing for an audience that we don't even know of. Right? We are not here to be judged on the basis of our creativity alone. There are certain constraints on us. What are our constraints? If I ask you to self-diagnose yourself as to what your problem is with writing, the first thing you will think of is content. You may think, or you may be led to believe, because this is the lazy way out. Oh, why are you not scoring well? I don't know enough. Right? While that may be a pertinent factor as to why you're not scoring, it's not the only factor. You are forgetting that you are writing in a certain context, which is to say, you're not writing poems, you're not writing huge essays for an audience, which some of them may include women, children, kids. You're not writing to impress people. You are writing within a certain constraint, and there are multiple constraints here. One being content, the other being time, the other being real estate, and the other being your audience. Which is to say, we are not engaging in creative writing. Our task is to score the most from a question paper. Which is to say, somebody has asked me questions, and I have to answer those questions. I'm not going to be judged on the basis of my creativity, कि मैं कितनी अच्छे words use करता हूँ. मुझसे एक सवाल पूछा गया, somebody has asked me a question, I have to answer it adequately. My audience is not a random person. My audience is an invigilator, or you can say an examiner rather, not invigilator. And this examiner, I'm sure, will have some academic background. We don't know who these examiners are, honestly. Nobody knows, right? Maybe some people have some inside stories on who these examiners are, but you can almost always guess that this person either has an academic background, which is to say is associated with an academic institution, or has been doing this activity for a long period of time, right? He's there not to appreciate you for the beauty of your content. He is there evaluating whether the question that you were asked, did you answer that question satisfactorily or not? You're not writing for an audience that you don't know of. That is one. So your task has to be that you impress this audience, some person who has a certain academic background. You do not want to be beating around the bush. You want to come straight to the point, exactly in the context of the question which was asked to you. Second is time, which is to say, I have not been commissioned by a book agency to write a book. Right? You are given 3 years of time. Oh, go write a really nice book for kids about how should kids sleep on the bed. Right? You're not given 3 years. It's not like you're writing a book for yourself. Eventually, you want it to be published. Right? You're not given months. There are 3 hours. And in these 3 hours, you have to write answers to 20 questions. 20 questions to be answered in 3 hours, where you are also struggling with how much you really know about that content. So this is also a constraint. Next constraint is real estate, which is to say, for every question, the number of pages given are limited. You cannot ask for an extra sheet. When you get your answer booklet, there are questions written on top, followed by a certain amount of real estate. The next page will have another question. You cannot ask for an answer sheet too. All of these are your constraints. You have to work well within these constraints to make sure you get an impeccable score, which helps you browse through, or you can say which helps you cruise through your mains examination straight to your personality test. Now, the idealism of answer writing is one thing. The realism of answer writing is completely different. If somebody asks you, what should be the components of an ideal answer? एक ideal answer होता क्या? एक सवाल आपसे पूछा गया, right? What would be the ideal answer to this specific question? I typically talk about the following things. कि ideal answer में क्या क्या जाता है? I will show you a certain presentation, if this works for me. Yes. The expectations from an ideal answer to a question which has been asked are the following. Pehli expectation is relevance of your content, which is to say, if you have been asked a question, whatever you have written as an answer to that question, is your content relevant to what has been asked or not? Right? You have been asked X, you are answering Y. Not going to get great scores. That's the first thing, relevance. Second thing is balance. Now, questions can be about a singular thing. Questions can also be multifaceted, which is to say, sometimes there are parts to a question, right? Not all parts have to be weighed equally. For example, if the question is, define urbanization, what are the social problems created by rapid urbanization in the country? Now, ideally speaking, define urbanization is one part, and you can also see another part which is explain the social problems associated with this. You should automatically know that this cannot be a 50-50. Define urbanization is probably going to take you 1 sentence or 2 odd sentences, that's about it. Most of the chunk has to go towards discussing the social problems created by this urbanization or rapid urbanization in the country, which is to say, if a question is multifaceted, when I'm putting my content in, is there a sense of balance or not? In a question that I just spoke of, are you writing 50-50? Are you going to write half your words explaining what urbanization is and only the remaining half words explaining what rapid urbanization has done in terms of creating social problems in India? There has to be a sense of balance. And when you say balance, balance is not 50-50. Balance is appropriate content deserving that the demand of the question deserves, right? Never has to be thought of from a 50-50 perspective. That's the first thing. Followed by substantiation. Substantiation का मतलब क्या? Whenever you are writing your content, is your content backed by evidence or not? Which is say, you may be writing multiple things that India has a grave problem of poverty. Do you have anything to back it with? Can you give me some quotations? Can you give me some data points? Can you show me a graph? Can you show me anything that makes this claim substantial, that presents an evidence to this claim, right? Are your arguments substantiated by facts, by perspectives, by opinions or not? Followed by language, right? What is the language that you are using? Followed by presentation. These are my 5 components of what an ideal answer should have. I have divided this in a little bit more detail. When I say relevance, relevance basically means that the content of your answer must remain well within the demand of the question. Right? Sometimes, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing about UPSC syllabus. The good thing is that multiple parts of your syllabus are interrelated. Right? When I am discussing, let's say, border security, problems in internal security, they have a clear connection with international relations also. You have India and its neighborhood, so you study it in international relations, you also study it in internal security. When I am discussing food security has a certain economics behind it, so it's a part of my economics course also. Food security is also a part of social justice, which is general studies too. Right? There are multiple aspects which are interlinked. Now, because there are multiple aspects interlinked, chances are that whatever has been asked, you would have studied about that specific term in one context or the other. That means, तुम्हें कुछ तो पता होगा उसके बारे में. जो आपको पता है, क्या वो लिखना है, और जो आपसे पूछा गया है कि आपको वो लिखना है. It's the latter. You have to answer exactly as per the demand of the question, not what you know. That's the first requirement. The content has to be relevant to whatever has been demanded. Followed by, there should be nothing in your answer which is not relevant to the demand of the question. Which is to say, sometimes we have the habit of putting in certain content just because we know it, or because we have studied so much, I know X, Y, Z things. Normally this used to happen to me in culture. Whatever I have studied was typically asked as a part of the question itself, right? And the question used to be something different. Now, because I have studied something about Nataraj, I have to write that. पूछा गया, नहीं पूछा गया, मैं लिख दूंगा. Right? There should be, ideally speaking, nothing in your answer which does not fall in line with what the question demanded. Ideally speaking. So my approach to making sure that my answer is relevant is, first thing what I would want to do is, I'm going to take some time to read the question. I'm going to identify what the demand of the question is correctly. And then whatever I know about the subject in question, I have to organize that content in my mind, picking out only the relevant bits which I have to write down in the answer itself. I, at no point, should only be focusing on things that I know about it, because I have studied so much, right? अब तो तू सुन कि मैंने क्या पढ़ा है इसके बारे में. नहीं. I have to look at what he has been asking me and I have to answer accordingly. That is what I get evaluated on, ideally speaking. Second is, like I said, balance. Like I said, balance is not 50-50. Balance basically means that if there is a question which is multidimensional or which has multiple parts, each part should merit content in respect to its appropriateness. Sometimes they ask you questions which may have multiple parts. Not all of those parts deserve equal attention. Depending upon how I weigh each part of the question, I should put in appropriate content. That is balance. Typically, questions, like I said, involve more than one facet. Not all facets require equal weightage. Your answer must appear balanced in terms of weightage assigned to different parts of the question itself. Right? What should be your approach? My approach is to identify different parts of the question and rank each part of the question in terms of how much content should I put in. Right? Sometimes questions have one part. Sometimes questions have 2, 3, 4 parts. Depending upon what I think is more relevant, right, I should assign it equal weightage in my answer. That is my ideal expectation, right? What the examiner ideally expects from me. followed by substantiation, right? Like I said, arguments presented in your answer, they need to be backed with evidence wherever necessary. Use of examples, data, perspective, opinions, etc. It lends credibility to your answers. Now that may lead you to believe, and it's a very, very common question amongst aspirants, now what should I do with data? How should I read data? Right? How should I collect data? I will answer all of those questions eventually. Right? This creates this enigma amongst aspirants, this obsession amongst aspirants that they want to secure all of the data in a certain diary. Right? Now they don't know how to use it. I will tell you how do you use it. Followed by, I have specifically mentioned it here, make sure that your answer does not look like a data sheet. Which is to say, if you had to write a 10 marker and in the 10 marker, you made 5 points. There was an introduction followed by 5 points in the body part, followed by a conclusion. Your obsession with data or factoids or examples should not make it look like introduction में आपने 3 data points डाल दिए, हर example पे हर point में आपने 4 data point डाल दिए, conclusion में भी data point डाला. Right? That should not happen. You have to put in data or examples wherever necessary. Right? It should not be replete with examples, replete with data points. Make an argument. If there is a need, also use an example. I'll tell you how do you use it. Ideally speaking, you should use examples, you should use factoids, you should use, you can say, opinions, perspectives from credible persons. Followed by language. The only recommendation from me would be your language has to be as simple as possible. A lot of candidates who have had previously no experience either in terms of writing or you can say speaking, they may get influenced by some person's vocabulary. Mark my words, your vocabulary is actually going to be counterproductive. Right? The task is to communicate what you know about the question to the examiner. If you start throwing in words which the examiner also does not know, he is not going to bother with taking out his mobile phone, finding out what the meaning of this word is to understand what you have written. So make sure your language is as lucid, as simple as particularly possible. Right? This is very, very critical. The second part, depending upon the subject in question, try to use the vocabulary of the said subject. When I say this, I would want you to remind the same thing once again. Same topics may be relevant for social justice as may be relevant for economics. The same topics may even be relevant for ethics for that matter. There may be questions or there may be certain factors which were historical, but the question is about economics. For example, land reforms. There was a question asked this year also, I guess, on land reforms. If you get a question asked on land reforms, you do not understand land reforms unless you get into the history behind it as to what really happened, what really unfolded. Now, depending upon whether it was asked in General Studies 1 or General Studies 3, your answer has to use the same vocabulary. If it's about an economics-based question, it has to use certain words which make your answer look like it's an economics ka answer, not a history ka answer. Right? You have each subject has its own vocabulary. International relations will have some vocabulary, some terms, some phrases which are commonly used. Polity has certain vocabulary of its own. Economics has certain vocabulary of its own. Society has certain vocabulary of its own. You have to throw in certain words which make your answer qualified as to whether it's a society ka answer or is it a polity ka answer. You have to make that differentiation clear. Use this vocabulary per se. Avoid using words and phrases that are hard to understand, especially hard to understand for the examiner also. Right? So it's not about impressing it by using words like, decoupling and dehyphenation of sorts. Nahi likhna hai. If you can explain the same thing in a very simple manner, you are going to get more marks if you can explain it in a simple manner rather than complicating it for the examiner also. Right? If it's only you who understands what he has written, right, then the examiner is not going to bother. Followed by, make your answer look like a coherent whole. These are ideal expectations. I'm going to take questions also after I'm done. Right? Like I said, presentation. The only one thing that you have to remember in context of presentation is that use of smart art has to be seen not as a substitute of content, but as a supplement to the content. Right? If you were asked about a certain biological phenomenon, and if you come out only drawing the diagram, right, leaving for the examiner to make of it whatever interpretation he has, and then you're not going to get marks. Your smart art, your tables, your graphs, your bar charts, your histograms, your hub and spoke models, all of them have to be seen from the perspective of them adding to your answer, a value addition, not as a substitute for content. Right? That is the one thing that you have to, and use them liberally. This is the expectation from an ideal answer. An ideal answer has to have these 4 to 5 odd components. Now let us come down to the realism of it. The realism of it is that there are 3 hours to begin with. 3 hours may you have to answer 20 questions. Now 20 questions may, there is a clear-cut differentiation. You have one part which has 10 questions, 10 marks each. Another part which has 10 questions, 15 marks each. Now 10 questions, 10 marks, all of them have to be expressed in 150 words, which is the prescribed word limit. For 15 markers, the word limit is 250 words. All of this has to be done in 3 hours. Now, to think about an answer standalone after you have read the specific subject and to write an answer, when you probably aaj maine land reforms pada, here was this question which was asked in a pre-IQ, I'm going to write a great answer to this. That is a different ball game. The mains examination is a completely different ball game. 3 hours, 20 questions from a range of different subjects, and you have to answer them. Now, you're not limited just by time. Only 3 hours. You're also limited by real estate, which is say for a 10 marker, you're going to get 2 sheets. For a 15 marker, you're going to get 3 sheets. That is also one more constraint on you. Now, in this constraint, how do you maximize your score? First is to understand how many questions should I attempt. कितने questions मुझे attempt करने चाहिए, because your self-diagnosis is always and always going to start and end with this. Why do I know all these questions or not? If you ask me realistically, and if you ask any person who has been successful at this exam realistically, every year if you have 20 odd questions, there will be 2 to 3 odd questions which most people are going to struggle with. That is what happens. Right? You may not have, either you may have 0 content for those questions, or you may have content which is not relevant to what has been asked. Should you attempt those questions or should you not? That is one question which has to be solved. Followed by, if I want to attempt, let's say, all the questions, how should I go about it? Now 3 hours tell me that I have a total of 180 minutes. 180 minutes have to be distributed amongst 20 questions, so it cannot be 9 minutes each. Why? Because there is one block which is a total of 100 marks, another block which is a total of 150 marks. At the end of the day, I have no way of knowing how much was I evaluated on each answer. What is going to take me through is the aggregate score. In the aggregate score, which is 250, एक set है 100 का, दूसरा set है 150 का. That means the amount of time that should go to a 150 wala block has to be 150 divided by 250 times 180. And the amount of time that has to go to this block has to be this. If you do your calculations, right, which is say if there is 10 questions, 100 marks, 10 questions, a total of 150 marks, you cannot be giving them all the same time. Some questions, imagine a scenario where you are trying to give them all the same time and then you end up doing only 10 questions, 10 marks each. You did not even attempt those 15 markers. Ideally speaking, you should be beginning with a 15 marker, because chances are that if you, in the course of time, tend to leave out one or the other question, it better be a 10 marker compared to a 15 marker, because you're going to lose out on more marks. 100 marks out of a total of 250 times 180 is roughly going to give you 7 minutes. That means 7 minutes per answer. Will be a total of roughly around 70 odd minutes. That means the remaining 110 minutes has to go to this block. This means a total of 11 minutes. You have 7 minutes to answer a 150 word question. You have 11 minutes to answer a 250 word question. Now that changes the game entirely, right? It's not that you're sitting in the comfort of your home. You have just studied a topic. Now you have been given a question and ample amount of time and you have to write it down. No, you barely have the time to blink in your mains examination. Barely have the time to blink, which is to say when you are made to do 20 questions in 3 hours, it is a different game altogether. So you have to know how do I time each of these questions. Now both of these questions are interrelated. How many questions should I attempt and how much time should I give to each question? If the question was that how many questions should I attempt, if this was the central question, you ask this to 100 people, 100 people are going to give you 100 different opinions on this. I'm going to give you mine. If you ask me how many questions should I attempt, I will say all 20. When I say all 20, there is a reason behind it and the reason has a certain logic. The logic is that there can be 2 strategies. One is, oh, I know 16 questions, I don't know 4. Right? In those 4 questions that I don't know the answers to, if I'm going to write answers to these questions, of course, it's not going to be impressing the examiner. What I'm basically doing is I'm wasting my time on these 4, right? I should invest that time on my remaining questions just so I can make the other questions look even better than I know. That has a certain, you can say, drawback. First drawback is that will you actually get 16 questions that you know absolute answers to? That is one, that is not within your control. Second, what you think is an ideal answer, the examiner also has to agree with you. Now that depends upon when the examiner was checking your answer sheet, whose answer copy did he check first? Right? You could be the first in the day, you could create a really good impression, you could be the last in the day, you could be somewhere in the middle. If let's say a prospective rank 1 is just before you, he has written an even stellar answer to the same question, right? The same question where you are expecting your answer has to be marked an excellent answer, right? Answer checking, because it's a psychological process, right? If there is a candidate who has written a slightly better answer than you, you are going to get slightly lesser marks compared to that particular candidate. Once again, whose copies will be checked before you is not within your control, not at all. So most successful candidates have understood that this is a game of maximization. When I say maximization, what does it mean? It means that everybody knows how to get a better than average score in every question. For example, let's say if you're attempting a vision ka test series, you would have seen in a 10 marker, typically the average score is 4, 4.5. Everybody knows how to score a 4, 4.5 or a 5 odd. Excellent scores also some people get a 6, 6.5 sometimes. Right? Now for your answer to be excellent, there have to be n number of factors. First, that what was asked is exactly what you're an expert in. That you have a lot of data, you have a lot of examples to quote in that specific question. That is one. Second, the examiner also has to agree with you. Third is how did you actually present that answer? Multiple things will go into it. Whether your answer fetches a 6, 6.5 or it fetches a 5, you will be surer of the fact that your answer is definitely going to fetch you a 5 or an average plus, whatever the average is. You can never be sure whether this answer is going to fetch you a 6, 6.5. So go with what you are sure of, which is to say most successful candidates do what? They are not thinking or they're not picking 13 questions out of 20 and they're going to score excellent in these 13 questions. Their aggregate score will be higher than yours. No. What they're going to look at is I'm going to score better than average in most questions. Right? Better than average in most questions is going to total to an aggregate which is generally higher than writing a few questions but excellently. Right? One, you are leaving a lot to luck if you're attempting only a few questions. But if you're attempting most of the questions, right, chances are you pick up something or the other from each question, your aggregate score looks better. Now, for certain questions where you do not know the answer absolutely, jahan aapko pata hi nahi hai kya likha hua hai, a senior of mine who happened to be an IPS back in the day, the first instruction she gave me was this, that you attempt all questions, regardless of the fact whether you know the question or not. I found it very, very counterintuitive कि, oh, this exam selects the best minds of the country. Because it selects the best minds of the country, my arguments have to be great. How can I write some really shallow arguments or, write something absolutely irrelevant to a question? Her logic was simple. The logic was that if you are asked about, let's say, defense manufacturing mein indigenization, right? You may not know about the policies of the government, but you know something about India's imports or our import dependence, something which is loosely relevant to what has been asked. Just write it down. She says, if you're not going to attempt that question, you're going to straight up get a 0. You do not get any marks for not attempting a question. It's not a test match. Nobody's going to, clap for you because, oh, you left a great delivery. No, right? You write something there. If you write something, the chances are you may pick up 0.5, right? Sometimes you may pick up a 1, right? Sometimes you may not pick up anything. But if you have 3 to 4 such questions for every question paper, and if you're picking up crumbs or picking up, you can say rags literally, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 1, 2, or something like this, you are adding to your aggregate score 1, 1.5, 2 to 3 odd marks. Across 4 general studies paper, this will total up to be somewhere around 8 to 10 to 12 sometimes. And 8 to 10, 10 to 12 marks in a competitive examination is the difference between you getting an IRS, you getting an IRTS. That is the difference. So you understand this to be a competitive exam. If you leave an answer, you're going to get a straight 0. But if you attempt something or if you write something loosely relevant, maybe he gives you a 0.5. Only in the expectation of you getting a 0.5 or a 1 odd, right? You just attempted. I, of course, did not follow that logic, right? But I should have. She very famously told me that if you're asked about a cow, and if you don't know, if you're asked about a tree, and if you don't know about the tree, you tie a cow to that tree and write about the cow. Right? But you write something. That is a more practical suggestion coming from somebody who is already in the services. She was in IPS already. Of course, I did not take it. But now, if I look back, most candidates that I've seen getting selected, friends of friends, people who I know of, students, right? I know for a fact that the game is one that of maximization. So rather than thinking of getting excellent marks in some questions because it involves a degree of subjectivity which is not in your control, you are better off if your strategy is that I'm going to maximize scoring average plus across more questions rather than thinking of excellent across a certain few, right? That should be your strategy. That means for questions where you do not have great relevant content, you're not going to write a lot. If you're not going to write a lot, you should not be brainstorming for 9 minutes, for 7 minutes or 11 minutes, right? What are you going to write in 11 minutes? If you don't know the question, 11 minutes to nahi lagenge. Whatever little you know about it, maybe write it down in a 1 minute or 2 odd minutes, 3 odd minutes, save some time, invest that time in the question that you know of. So first thing is to scan the question paper, see how many questions that you do not absolutely know, and half the time straight up, right? Give that time to the other questions that you know answers to. That is one part. Second thing is about you being limited by words. The most, I think, the most erroneous self-diagnosis in this exam is that I don't know enough. Honestly, 150 words and 250 words, practically speaking, in the scheme of things means absolutely nothing. If you don't believe me, read a particular topic, become an expert in that topic, pick a question on that topic, and express the same question in 150 or 250 words. You will always find yourself wanting to write more. In all the topics that you have knowledge of, you will always find that this real estate, that these number of words are absolutely nothing. ये कुछ होता ही नहीं है. 150 words is absolutely nothing. 250 words is absolutely nothing. It's a daunting task in certain questions which you do not know answers to, right? So 150, 250 words, although this is not a real strictly time, मतलब ऐसा कोई strict limit ये नहीं है, but you have to stick well within these limits, right? If you want to stick well within these limits, you have to get better at this art. This art is one that of condensation. Condensation means, oh, I know a lot about this specific topic, but because I am given only 150 words, 250 words, I have to condense it down or I have to pick selectively things that are more relevant to this question which has been asked. This art of condensation is going to be very, very handy, very, very useful to you. This is eventually going to take a lot of practice. You will get better at this, but you have to know this. 150, 250 words is basically nothing. It's actually nothing if you actually know a specific topic. This is the realism aspect of it. 3 hours, 20 questions, different topics, limited by time, limited by the amount of space that you get, becomes a completely different ball game altogether. So how are we going to think about it practically? You have to think of the anatomy of an answer. Go away from your ideal expectations. It's always good to think of an answer ideally. Oh, ek answer ideally mein ye to hona chahiye. Yes, keep that there, but think about it more realistically. If you think about the anatomy of an answer, anatomy ka matlab kya? Internal structures kya honge of an answer? Every answer is a coherent set of 3 things. Introduction, body, and conclusion. 3 things. Most people are worried about structure. This is the structure of an answer. Any answer, any piece of writing has 3 components: introduction, followed by the body, followed by the conclusion. Each of these 3 parts serves a specific function. The function of an introduction is to set the context. The function of the body part is to address the requirement of the question, and the role of the conclusion is to wrap up. Each of these 3 parts has a specific function, much like a movie. Any movie will give you some introduction about the characters, right? It will then have the main story, and then the movie is eventually going to end, right? Now, a movie may have a linear shape, it may have a non-linear shape. A movie is just on the basis of its creativity. This is not a creative process. You have been asked a question, you have to write an answer. Your answer also has to have 3 parts: an introduction, followed by a body part, followed by a conclusion. The introduction is going to set the context for you, right? The context is to be set for the discussion which is about to follow. Which is, you were asked about a certain phenomenon. You gave some introduction about the phenomenon in about 1 line or 2 lines odd. Then you came down straight up to the body part. In the body part, you're going to address exactly what was specifically asked by the question itself. Once you are done with the body part, any answer looks so much better if it's also eventually, if it finds a closure. Every story will be better off if there is a good closure to it. So you wrap up that discussion too. If you, let's say, want to score 6 on 10. In a 6 on 10, how much do you think is going to be coming from introduction and conclusion combined? At best 2 marks. At best 2. Because you have to address the requirements of the question. This is where the meat of your score is going to lie. This is where you're actually addressing the requirements of the question. Both of these are add-ons. So at best, a great introduction, a great conclusion together is going to add 1, 1.5, max 2 marks to your score. Most of the marks are going to come from the body part itself. Because the bulk of your score is going to be concentrated in the body. That means the bulk of your content also has to be going into the body. You have to leave very less for introduction, very, very less for conclusions. And I will demonstrate it to you, showing you answer scripts of toppers. Most of you, when you start to write your answers, you are always and always thinking about, oh, how do I introduce this answer? Every one of you wants to score a 6 only on the basis of your introduction. Right? You tend to confuse yourself so much कि एक अच्छा introduction क्या होगा, एक ideal introduction क्या होगा, या एक ideal conclusion क्या होगा. You are so worried about both of these parts, completely neglecting that the bulk of your score is going to come from this. Right? Why are you too focused on introduction and conclusion? Both of these, because they do not fetch you great marks, also have to get very little content, realistically speaking. Both of these, therefore, should also be templatized. Templatized का मतलब क्या? It means that you should already know what will go into your introduction, what will go into your conclusion, right? I'm not saying in matters of content, I'm talking in matters of principle. Right? Any question when you are trying to introduce it, any answer when you're trying to introduce it, you have to focus on two things primarily, which is the what and or why. When I say what, it means, what did you ask me in the question? Do I have a definition of this term? Or if I find a prominent term about which the question is, can I find a way to define it? ये चीज होती क्या है? या तो what or why? Why did you ask me this question? Right? For example, there may be a question, let's say, on conservation of a specific bird or a specific insect or something of that sort. It was in the news. You knew that it has been in the news of late. So you know already why have you asked me this question, right? If there is a question, let's say, on interstate disputes, more specifically, let's say it's a question on, let's say, regionalism in the Northeast, you already know why has he asked you the question, because of a conflict happening in Manipur. If you know there is a context to it, you write that context down in a singular line. If you already have this template in your mind, which is to say, I'm going to write a 2-line, 3-line introduction at best, and my introduction most likely is going to be about what, why, or a combination of both of these, right? If I can express this in 3 words, my job is already done. I'm not going to waste any more time thinking about something which in the larger scheme of things is not going to fetch me the bulk of my marks. The bulk of my marks are going to be coming here, not here. So you templatize it, right? You should always almost know कि मुझे क्या लिखना है introduction में. Followed by the body part, because body part is where you exactly address the requirements of the question. Here it is about identifying the parts of the question, identifying the weightage of each of these parts, and then directly addressing the requirements of the question. You don't have to beat around the bush. If he has spoken to you about reaching D from A, you go from A to B to C to D. You don't have to go from A to J, J to K, K to C, C to B, then B to C, C to D. No, you don't have to beat around the bush. You straight up answer what has been asked directly. Why directly? Because there is not a lot of time. 7 minutes is not a lot. 11 minutes is not a lot when you have to write 150 or 250 words. Right? So you do not think, or you do not be worried about a creative expression of it. No, no, no. Straight up think about what points have to go in here, and those points which are relevant to the scheme of things should be mentioned as they go. Simple. Once you are done with these, then you are left with your conclusion. Once again, a meaty conclusion means that you're going to waste time, you're going to waste a lot of words on that also. Don't do that. Think of templatizing conclusions also, and there are ways of doing it. If the question, let's say, is about an issue, mention a few solutions. If the question is about, let's say, prospects, mention certain fallouts. This exam, by and large, is an exam on issues. If you look at most of your questions, except for history, except for probably art and culture, most questions are about issues. Since most questions are about issues, and if he has asked you straight up what the issue is with this and this thing, mention a few solutions. Don't explain them in detail. Just throw in the names of solutions if you know any. If there are any government initiatives, government schemes, government policies that you know of, just throw in the name, that's it. You're not expected to elaborate on it, just throw in the solution. This brings a sense of balance. Balance ka matlab kya? He's asked you about a certain issue. It tells the examiner that you don't think in a unidimensional manner, right? You also know that there is a certain solution to it, and you have mentioned that solution. You did not explain it because that was not a demand. Similarly, if there is something about the prospects, oh, tell me all the good things about smart cities mission. What is the prospect? What are the economic prospects, social prospects? It's a happy question. It's a question in a positive connotation. If there is a question in a positive connotation, also mention if you know certain issues around it, certain challenges around it. Just throw the names in. 2 to 3 sentences, that's about it, right? Depending upon what the question was, right? Try to bring in another perspective in the conclusion, and both the introduction and the conclusion have to be short and crisp. Most of your focus has to go here. We will start from the first thing, which is how do you bring relevance to your answer? For you to bring relevance to your answer, you have to remember that you read the question very carefully, then identify the parts of the question, weigh each part, organize your content, then write it down in the same manner: introduction, body part, conclusion, right? With this and this being short and crisp, this being the bulkiest. This is your basic exercise. Starts by reading the question very, very carefully, right? And when you're reading the question carefully, identify each of these parts. Let's do a basic exercise. I'll tell you, देखो, realism क्या होता है और idealism क्या होता है. See. Okay, let's read this question. The question says, the existence of relative deprivation is an important aspect in constructing the argument for regionalism. Explain with examples. How many of you know about regionalism? कितनों को इसके बारे में कुछ content पता है? I don't expect an answer out of you. If you know it, great. If you don't, not a problem. You know something? Can somebody tell me what is this question all about? What is the demand of the question? Now, the most exciting questions to my mind are questions which appear in society aspect. जो society में पूछे जाते हैं, मेरे को सबसे अच्छे question वो लगते हैं. What is the question? Yes, relative deprivation basically. He's basically asking you that the existence of relative deprivation is an important aspect in constructing an argument for regionalism, which is to say, whenever you're thinking of regionalism, at the heart of it is a phenomenon. This phenomenon is a relative deprivation, which is central to the existence of regionalism. Now, basically you have to highlight what is the link between the two, right? You have to explain this with examples. Now, you may know about this, you may not know about this. Let me tell you a brief bit about regionalism. थोड़ा बहुत मैं आपको बताता हूँ, just so I show you the range of content that you have. In my understanding, regionalism, whenever you are studying regionalism, there are multiple aspects of it. First aspect is the definition of the word itself. You will definitely read the definition. I'm assuming that you are well prepared. This is a question which was asked in general studies, and you would know some content. Of course, if you don't know about that content, let me give you that content right away. Whenever I'm going to read regionalism, I'm going to start with a definition. What does it basically mean? Then I'm going to be thinking of causal factors behind regionalism, or I may say manifestation of regionalism. Then I'm going to be thinking of, let's say, certain solutions or certain perspectives. Because this is an exam of issues, so every time I'm picking up an issue, first I'm thinking about is this issue contemporary, is this issue historical, right? Which is to say, is this a new issue, has this been happening for a long time? If it is contemporary, what triggered it? If it is historical, why has it been persisting, right? Then, are there any, like, how do I express this? Like, how do I know that there is regionalism in the country? Are there any examples of this? Is there any solution if it is a problem, right? And if there is a solution, have we done something? Most likely that's how we organize our content in terms of any issue. What is regionalism? You say regionalism because it's a social phenomenon. Regionalism has two connotations. Most social phenomena will have two connotations. Regionalism, ideally speaking, because it's an ism, it's an ideology. In a positive sense, regionalism means that my loyalties are tied to the region to which I belong. Which is say, in a positive manner, regionalism is nothing but the love for my own region. But it's the same thing with communalism also. Now, communalism also has two perspectives to it. Communalism, ideally speaking, basically means that you feel or you belong to a certain community, a feeling of longing for your community. But both regionalism and communalism acquire a completely different meaning when you put them in the context of this sub-Asian bloc, which is that of India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. In our bloc, regionalism acquires a negative meaning also. What is that negative meaning? The negative meaning is regionalism is a phenomenon where you can say people's loyalties get tied to their region and they start to think that the interests of their region are the same and these interests are different from other regions. Now, it's a three-stage process, much like communalism is. First will be where you start to think that the interests of my region or the people belonging to my region, my social interests, economic interests, political interests are all similar. Then the second phase of rabid regionalism would be that I start to feel that these interests are different from other regions. And the most virulent form will be when I start to feel that my interests and the interests of other regions are antithetical, that there is no convergence between them, right? That is the more negative connotation of regionalism. It has both positive and negative meanings. Now, what causes regionalism, right? If there is a term which has both positive and negative meanings, जो भी चीज पॉजिटिव होगी उसका सवाल पूछने का probability almost next to nothing है. जो issue ही नहीं है उस पर सवाल नहीं पूछते normally. Issue होगा तो question बनेगा. Right? Now, what causes regionalism? How can your loyalties be tied to a region? Because a region, ordinarily speaking, is a geographical area, a geographically contiguous area. That's what we call a region. What is it so special about about your area that you start to feel so affectionate towards it that you are willing to take up arms against other people? It is not region that causes regionalism. It is when various markers of identity get concentrated in a region that creates a condition for regionalism. Which is to say, causal factors mein, first, you have to understand that region on its own stands meaningless. Whether you belong to a certain topography, if I'm a mountain-based person, if I come from the state of Jammu and Kashmir, I've seen a lot of mountains. I'm not going to be associating with everybody who comes from the land of mountains. Right? I'm not going to be, you can say, relating with somebody who comes from an Uttarakhand. His culture is completely different. Right? Somebody who comes from, let's say, the Nilgiri Hills, Niche. I'm not going to relate to them just because we share a specific type of region. No. Region alone is meaningless. It is when regions find that there is a concentration of what we say markers of identity. For example, language, religion, for example, common history, politics, economics for that matter. Multiple aspects of our identity, when they get concentrated in a specific region, followed by this important phenomenon which is called a relative deprivation, that creates a recipe for regionalism. You have to understand this. Region alone, nothing. Concentration of markers of identity in a region, once again, nothing. Right? But concentration of markers of identity in a region coupled with politics of what we call a relative deprivation. So whenever you study regionalism, I'm sure you are going to take classes or you are going to study on your own, you will study this term relative deprivation, and it's one of the favorites of UPSC. They have asked multiple questions previously also. Now, what is relative deprivation? If people belonging to my culture live in a certain region, we are not automatically agreed that we want to slit the throats of other people. No, hum nahi karenge. There has to be something that causes it. That phenomenon is called relative deprivation. Now, what is relative deprivation? Relative deprivation basically means, one, the subjective consciousness that I am conscious that there is a difference between my expectations and my reality compared with others or myself, and the subjective dissatisfaction caused by it. This is the meaning of the term relative deprivation. It is deprivation, but relative. Relative का मतलब क्या? It is written in a comparative sense. Relative, either most people will think relative to others, not necessarily. Relative to your own self also. If I am aware that this was my expectation, but my reality is this, compared to either my own past or people belonging to other regions, I am going to feel aggrieved by it. And when I feel aggrieved by it, the amount of dissatisfaction it's going to cause me, that combined with both of these factors will flame what is called regionalism. This is when I start to feel that my region also deserves importance. We have to stand for the interests of my region. We have to express my interests. These interests may be in line with the interests of other region, may not be in line with the interests of the other region. That may create regionalism, right? Now, every time you read regionalism, you will definitely read relative deprivation. Now, this is just the theoretical understanding of what regionalism basically means. You have to understand कि इसका manifestation क्या है. What do you mean by relative deprivation? Now, relative deprivation is a state of subjective dissatisfaction caused because you expected something, you are getting something else compared to either your own past or compared to other people. That creates a subjective dissatisfaction. It's called relative deprivation. In the context of India, how does regionalism manifest itself? You will find that relative deprivation can occur along multiple dimensions. It may occur along cultural dimensions, for example, language, religion, common history, even economic dimensions. Multiple aspects along with relative deprivation can happen. For example, pick up this one in terms of language. When the state tries to impose a certain language or declares a certain language as the official language of the entire nation, in a particularly pluralistic nation such as ours, right, it is going to make certain people feel that their language, which is a very important marker of their identity, is not getting the importance that it deserves. There is a manifestation in the form of anti-Hindi conflicts. This happens when multiple states on the south, the Dravidian states, they argue for the importance of their own Dravidian languages and they stand united. They may have multiple conflicts between each other, but on the issue of language, they unite as a single front and they express their voice against the rest of the nation, against the imposition of Hindi. Right? They are feeling deprived that their language is not getting adequate importance. Now this is happening at the national level. You think about it within a state itself. Bodos have a problem with the mainstream Assamese in respect of Bodo language itself. The Official Languages Act of the state of Assam, which tried to make Assam the official state language, Bodos felt aggrieved by it. And Bodos started to demand a separate homeland of their own. There was a distinction made, we will create a Bodo land 50-50. Eventually we have taken a lot of different steps, but that was a cause of concern. The same cause of concern you will find happening in the context of the demand for Gorkha land, which is where the Bengali state, the West Bengal state, has multiple times tried to impose upon them Bengali as an official language. Right? That is going to create problems. Whatever it is a central question. Language is always a central question. In fact, there is a demand for creating Bhojpur. The demand for creating Bhojpur it's coming from certain regions of eastern UP and certain regions of Bihar. Right? They want to create a region of Bhojpur. In fact, one of the demands is also to include Bhojpuri in the 8th schedule. Right? There is a demand. Language can form a marker of identity where you start to feel that my language, why is it not a part of the 8th schedule? Why is my language not getting the importance that it should deserve? So that can be relative deprivation along a cultural factor, which is language. You may have deprivation, in fact, South mein, there was a clear demand of Dravidistan also. Dravidistan is a successionist demand that they wanted to create Dravid Nadu bhi bol do and Dravidistan bol do, a separate nation of their own, basis language itself. You may talk about economic deprivation also, relative deprivation happening along economic lines. This created Telangana, right? This created the state of Jharkhand also. In fact, the present, you can say, conflict between Vidarbha region and the rest of Maharashtra, right? the second-hand treatment as they are experiencing it at the hands of the Maharashtra government. There is a demand for creating a separate state of Vidarbha also. There is that demand too. So economic deprivation also finds its manifestation. There are regionalistic demands on the basis of economics. You may have religion as the basis, right? Now, although there is a lot of literature, but religion has formed a central basis, although it gets coupled with language also. The trifurcation of Punjab, although there are multiple factors, one of them being Gurmukhi or the language per se, but there is a certain element of religion also being an influential factor. The demand for a separate state or an independent nation of Kashmir, that secessionist demand, has certain religious undertones to it also, right? You may think of common history. Common history is an example of relative deprivation when you are comparing with yourself. There was a state which is called Vindhya Pradesh. Vindhya Pradesh was already a state. It was later subsumed within the state of Madhya Pradesh itself. The Madhya Pradesh state government the legislature has passed a resolution that they are well behind creating a separate state of Vindhya Pradesh also, right? But the central government is taking absolutely no steps in this regard. There is a demand for creating Vindhya Pradesh, which is to say where people who had a definite political entity of their own, their political entity got subsumed within the broader fold of Madhya Pradesh, now want to create a separate political entity of their own. Of course, taking a leaflet from what happened in the case of Uttarakhand, which was previously Uttaranchal. Uttaranchal was granted, Jharkhand was granted, Chhattisgarh was created. So that also intensified that demand that we want to create a separate state of Vindhya Pradesh too. This is in comparison with your own history. In fact, the demand for creating Bundelkhand out of Uttar Pradesh is also because Bundelkhand has had a specific historical significance as a region, not as a part of Uttar Pradesh, right? So there are demands, right, which are on the basis of relative deprivation, and relative deprivation finds multiple manifestations. Now, all of these demands are not going to be demands which are genuine. Right? We have tried to accommodate certain demands. We have not tried to accommodate certain demands. If you have to take a stance on regionalism, you will say that regionalism on itself is one, it's not a singular phenomenon, it's based on multiple factors. There have to be multiple things combined which will create something called regionalism, and it is not always bad. For example, your States Reorganization Commission, your first commission, States Reorganization Commission, created political units on the basis of identity only, na? It created states on the basis of language. Did that work out well for you or not? It has worked out well for you. You have created the state of Jharkhand, you have created the state of Chhattisgarh, you have created the state of Uttarakhand. It did not hurt national integration. Sometimes demands are genuine. And when demands are genuine, the state should, you can say, respond with an accommodative stance. If you find that the demand is genuine and it is being expressed well within the constitutional fold or well within the constitutional framework, which is say you're not resorting to vandalism, you're not resorting to violence, right? You're not beating up UP people in the state of Maharashtra. If you're not doing any of that, your demands should be heard, and if your demands are genuine, right, it should be accommodated. But if these demands fall outside of the purview of the constitutional framework, then the state has to take what is called a statist reflexive attitude, because then the question will be that of national integration. Why? Because this is a problem which may be contagious. In a society or in a multicultural society like India, there are multiple markers of identity. If you go around every 30 kilometers, you will find some distance or some difference in terms of cultures. Every culture starts to demand a region of their own, that's going to create a huge problem. So you sometimes have to also look at regionalism primarily from the perspective of national integration, more specifically if you do not value those demands to be genuine, or if the expression of those demands do not fall within the constitutional framework. So it's a multifaceted phenomenon. There is both positive aspects to it and there are negative aspects to it also. The question asks you very simply that the existence of relative deprivation is an important concept in constructing the argument for regionalism discussed with examples. So all you had to do was first define regionalism, what does it basically mean? Then talk about what creates regionalism, theoretically speaking. You will talk about how region in itself means nothing. Region itself is not going to create any problem. Region coupled with the concentration of identity markers, followed by the politics of relative deprivation, creates a recipe for something called regionalism in its virulent form. Then you are going to explain what relative deprivation basically means, because that is the central demand of the question. Define relative deprivation and then tell them that relative deprivation manifests across various markers of identity. Give them certain few examples, right, of, you can say, relative deprivation in the cultural sphere, relative deprivation in the social sphere, in the economic sphere, political sphere, common history, multiple examples. And then when you are concluding it, remember, उसने तो थोड़ी पॉजिटिव कॉनोटेशन में क्वेश्चन पूछा है. He has asked you that relative deprivation की existence is ground enough for saying that yes, there will be regionalism. Therein you have to strike a certain bit of balance. That regionalism as a whole, one, is a multifaceted phenomenon. It's not caused by a singular factor. There have to be multiple things that come together to create regionalism, and its expression can be well within the constitutional framework, can also be genuine. But it can also not be genuine. It can become a threat to potential, you can say, national integration. It can breed the politics of nativism. Right? If genuine demands, if there, for example, politics of nativism ka matlab hai, a good expression is the sons of soil theory. If you're not taking care of this phenomenon, it may acquire something called parochial forms, where you start to feel that tumhara culture best, bakiyon ka culture kharab, right? And you also sometimes inflict violence upon certain people. Sons of soil theory is an example of this, that Maharashtra people start to feel that, oh, they have the first right over the resources of Maharashtra. Right? जब तक लेबर काम का था बढ़िया है, अब जब लेबर दिखता तो अच्छा नहीं लगता तो हम मारेंगे. That is something which is not acceptable. So the state has to take a reflexive attitude also. That will bring a sense of balance in your answer. Now, इतना सब कुछ पता है रीजनलिज्म के बारे में, right? लिखना है 150 words में, 150 words. Not a lot. I have included an answer from Animesh Pradhan. The reason behind selecting Animesh Pradhan's answer was, I think he, in General Studies 1, scored, if I'm not mistaken, probably the highest or the second highest. Right? Good score, great score rather. Look at his answer. And mark my words, look at the introductions, look at the conclusions. You will not find bulky introductions. नहीं दिखेंगे आपको. You'll find the introduction. It's basically a singular line itself. तुम बोल दो तो उसको दो में divide कर सकते थे, ज़्यादा नहीं रखा है. This is the introduction. If you look at the conclusion, this is the conclusion. Hence, this, then this. That's it. This is the conclusion. This is the introduction. Any topper is not going to waste a lot of time thinking about multiple things. Now, let's read his answer. He says, in the words of Ambedkar, the countrymen must identify themselves as Indians first, Indians last, and only as Indians. But relative deprivation gets asserted in the form of regionalism, leading to separation. Now, he's trying to make his introduction, it's relevant. Why? Because regionalism sometimes can be seen as a threat to national integration or your identity as an Indian first. Right? You start to feel that you're a Marathi person first, an Indian later. That could be a threat to national integration. So he's brought in a certain relevant quotation. Then he says, relative deprivation, intrastate disputes due to disparity in development. He's not explaining any of these. Separatist movement in Uttarakhand and Jharkhand. I don't know what separatist movement he's talking about. Third is ethnic violence in the Northeast. Zaza committee noted economic deprivation as one of the causes. Border disputes, like in the case of Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, river water disputes, sons of the soil theory. If you actually look at it, he has not explained. You had better content to write on this, relative deprivation across multiple indicators. You could have done that. He gives you a certain few examples. Remember, he's not explaining on any of these. Kuch explain nahi kiya. Then he goes on to say, but other factors also influence regionalism. Resource enrichment, for example, Khalistan movement in green revolution rich areas due to increased funds. Communalism and religious fundamentalism as mentioned in the Sachar committee. Cultural identity getting lost due to globalization and immigration, Northeast issue. Political opportunity, rise of regional parties, etc., etc. Right? Do you think you have a better answer to this question? Do you think you have a better answer to this question or not? If you understood regionalism and if you read regionalism, you will read about these things. Pakka padhoge, kyunki yahi to question पूछता है, right? Did he anywhere explain what relative deprivation means? Did he tell you that relative deprivation is a genuine cause? Right? He explains it to you with examples that this is genuine relative deprivation along the lines of culture, along the lines of language, along the lines of religion, along the lines of economic development, along the lines of your own political history. Did not give you any of that. Brings in certain few, you can say, points which are absolutely not related. In fact, he could have made it a part there. Right? This is actually a very far-fetched link. And then he answers. He just writes it down. Hence, India must be celebrated with its diversity along with mitigating inter-regional disparities. What did you learn from this? This is not to bring somebody's answer down. You have to remember this. This is only to set realistic expectations in your head, which is to say, whatever he knew relevant to the demand of the question, he has put it forth in a certain format, right, where the introduction is not very bulky, the conclusion is not very bulky. He is trying to use examples. He's trying to throw in the names of certain few committees. He's underlining each of those, right, and he's expecting certain marks out of it. You can always write a better answer. But why can you write a better answer? One, recency bias, which is you would have read realism abhi to तुरंत पता है, लिख लूंगा, क्यों नहीं लिखूंगा, बेहतर लिखूंगा. Second, you did not put any time limit to yourself. If you are writing a standalone answer, it is absolutely different because this is an answer which is a part of the Abhyas test series where he is to write 20 answers. उन 20 क्वेश्चंस के बीच में एक सवाल रीजनलिज्म का अगर आप पे आता है, you are not going to write any better than this also, right? You are probably going to write one or the other two examples. थोड़ा बहुत जो याद आया डाल दिया, ये आप करोगे. This is what is going to happen, and people have scored heavily, right? What you have to remember is that your idealistic expectations, they are good for the first 2 months, 3 months time, 4 months time. But your idealism has to turn into realism also, and that will only and only happen once you start writing full-length tests. That is when your expectations are absolutely clear. कि कितना लिखना होता है, इंट्रोडक्शन में कितना जाता है, कंक्लूजन में कितना जाता है, कितने पॉइंट्स लिखने हैं. Am I too, you can say, obsessed with writing only the relevant parts? Should I sometimes also add something to make use of the real estate? Should I just underline, should I just use some tips and tricks to score maybe better than what other people are doing? That is a different ball game altogether, right? Most candidates, I tell them, see, if you have had zero experience with writing answers, you start by writing a singular answer a day. उसको बोलते हैं baptizing yourself. अभी तो आप Christianity में आए ही हो, right? थोड़ा आपका सर डाला है पानी में, you have started to write, let's say, a certain answer, right? Because you have had no experience in writing, start by writing something. Write a singular answer a day, right? Eventually graduate to writing 5 answers a day. When you're writing a singular answer a day, there are 2 approaches to it. Most people are going to take the former approach, which is I'm going to write a perfect answer to this. Very few people are going to take the more realistic approach that if it's a 10 marker, I'm going to get 7 minutes. Let me see how much do I write in 7 minutes time. कि 7 मिनट में मैं क्या लिखता हूँ, 15 मिनट में मैं क्या लिख दूंगा. Obviously बात है, if I give you 20 minutes to write the same answer, you're going to write better. Some people also take help. Some people don't take help. They put themselves exactly in the 7-minute time frame and they write a certain answer down. Some person who has simulated the exam environment has a better understanding of what his expectations should be and what his problem areas are. Some person who is still stuck with idealism is not going to get a realistic experience of what it means to be writing in an exam setup and how do you actually score more marks. This delta has to be bridged. So you first start by writing 1 answer a day, but consistently. Get into the habit of writing. And you are going to write absolutely trash answers. Some of you, maybe all of you, maybe most of you, right? Maybe some of you are actually good. Start by doing that. Get into the habit of actually articulating that you know something, but how does that something translate into an answer? एक चीज होता है पता होना, दूसरा होता है उसको लिखना अपनी कॉपी पे. You start by writing. Don't worry about the time in the beginning. Just try to answer the question. But once you are done doing this, probably for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when you have a decent understanding of, oh, अच्छा ऐसे answer organize किया जाता है, then straight up start to time yourself. When you're timing yourself, right, don't do it for a singular answer, do it for a set of answers. Migrate to 5, from 5 to migrate to 10, from 10 you migrate to 20, right? This of course is going to take some time. Probably you'll start with writing a singular answer, you'll migrate in a couple of weeks to 5 answers a day, then you're going to migrate to, let's say, 10 answers a day, then you're going to migrate to 20 answers a day. When I'm saying 20 answers a day, quite obviously you will not write 20 answers a day every day. Ye nahi ho sakta, right? What you're going to do is set realistic expectations. Mahine mein at least 2 to likho, right? Just so you have a decent understanding of what it means to write a mains examination. The other approach is also useful, which is, should I write an ideal answer or not? You do that for questions, or you can say for areas which are high likelihood to be asked, right? जैसे agriculture में there are multiple topics which have a high likelihood of being asked, जैसे MSP, price intervention, right? Multiple schemes जैसे आ रही हैं, there are high likelihood. So you try to make or write ideal answers to those questions, because if a related question is asked, you don't lose a lot of time thinking about it. But that is not practice. Practice would only and only mean an exact simulation of the exam environment, which is also not, oh, I'm going to write every question or one question a day for 7 minutes. No, no, no. That is you baptizing yourself. But for you to actually become a true Christian, you will have to follow the Bible properly, which is say you will have to give yourself 3 hours. You have to give yourself 20 questions and then try to attempt most of those 20 questions. Then you are going to set your realistic expectations, right? Then you would automatically understand that I don't have to worry too much about the introduction. I don't have to worry too much about the conclusion. Most of the focus has to go to the body parts, and I have very little time. Then you will start to worry about, oh, how do I present my answer? How do I write in a short frame of time? Which format should I pick? Should I use my smart art or not? But first is to really understand what the demand of the question is. Pehle question padho, uski demand samjho, right? Now, like I said, we had so much to discuss about regionalism. Is everything important? No. Because he has asked you to link relative deprivation with regionalism. You may either begin with the definition of relative deprivation also. Start with the definition of relative deprivation. Tell them that relative deprivation is the single most important factor behind regionalism. Region combined with markers of identity combined with politics of relative deprivation creates something called regionalism. Relative deprivation can occur across multiple areas, as has been manifested in India. Give them examples, because he has asked for those examples. Give the examples across multiple markers of identity. Then also tell them, while it may be a valid argument for the existence of regionalism as a social phenomenon, but we also have to take care of other things, which is how does regionalism manifest itself? When it starts to become a threat to national integration, should we always be accommodative or not? That is going to give you the best answer to this possible question. Now, best is something that happens only in your room. When you go to the exam hall, sometimes you don't write really good answers to questions that you know the content to also. But you have to remember that your aggregate matters, right? You try to score more than average, more than average, more than average across most questions. That's how you maximize your aggregate score, right? A good case in point would be, जो मैं normally लोगों को बोलता हूँ, once you are done with the topic, go to Vision IS की website, go to the resources, find toppers की answer scripts, GS1, GS2, GS3, I think a classification is done there, right? For example, let's say you were studying something called communalism. GS1 की ही toppers की copies ढूंढना. Find a question on communalism which a topper has attempted. Don't look at his answer, write your answer down, compare your answer with the topper. 8 out of 10 times you will find your answer is better than what the topper has written. That may lead you to diagnose a completely different thing. You may start to feel that, oh, I'm very confident. Oh, I can write better than these toppers. Oh, what do these toppers write? You do not put yourself in the perspective of you writing 20 questions in a singular day in 3 hours time. That is a different ball game. Or एक answer एक दिन में लिखना is a different ball game. That should only give you confidence enough that yes, I can answer a question. But if the same question was asked to me in like a 3-hour setup, how would I have written it down? That is a different expectation. Only and only has to be solved by writing full-length tests, which you should write at least 5 to 6 months down into your preparation once you have a reasonable understanding of your subjects. after you have only after you have a reasonable understanding of the subjects. Do not start to write full length tests day one. वो नहीं हो सकता, right? You have to have some reasonable understanding of the subject before you attempt these full length tests. And when you're attempting these full length tests, do not shy away from attempting questions that you don't know answers to. See what impact that has on your aggregate score. You will always find your aggregate score is usually higher than what it would have been if you had attempted only 15, only 14. Zyada hi hoga, right? We'll take a short break here, and then I will discuss another question on you. We'll find a different question where I'll show to you how do you use vocabulary, right? Which is something when I'm very, very picky about. One question which most people have is, why do most candidates do not score very highly in GS3? Previously, it used to be GS2. Now it is GS3. A lot of candidates do not score very well in GS3. What is the main reason? I will tell you the main reason behind it with a demonstration. After I'm done with that demonstration, then I'm going to touch upon the various aspects of how the format should be. What is your format going to be? How do you present it better? What is smart art? How do you use it? Right? And then other questions that you may have. Right? We'll take a short break here.
Does the vast syllabus of general studies for the UPSC prelims overwhelm you to initiate your preparation for the civil services examination? Is your apprehension and self-doubt coming in the way of your success in joining the civil services? Comprehend your preparation for UPSC Prelims 2025 with the fast-track course targeting general studies with innovative curriculum, revision and mentorship. Starting from 19th November at 1 p.m., the course offers coverage of UPSC GS Prelims subjects, dedicated mentorship support and guidance for performance maximization, access to PT 365 classes for current affairs preparation, sectional mini tests for regular assessment and performance, personalized student portal to access study material, access to live and online classes. Enroll today and make prelims your stepping stone to proceed to the UPSC mains. A strong hold over current affairs is your way to succeed in the UPSC Civil Services examination. Brace yourself and get detailed coverage of relevant news both nationally and internationally. With the monthly current affairs revision program starting from 26th October at 5 p.m. Enroll today and elevate your current affairs knowledge with comprehensive coverage of current affairs compiled through relevant sources such as the Hindu Indian Express, Economic Times, PIB Yojana and others. Expert support and personalized mentoring. Comprehensive assessment through MCQs and mains-oriented questions.
Classical language as in? कौन सी वाली? वो डिपेंड करता है, जैसे भोजपुर की डिमांड तो है ही, उसको डाला गया, भोजपुरी को डाला इन्होंने इसके शेड्यूल में. बिहार के जब इलेक्शन आएंगे ना तब नोटिस करना, तब आपको दिखेगा डिमांड आ जाएगी ऑटोमेटिकली, राइट? तब अगर ऐड करेंगे तब आप उसको डाल सकते हो. हर अब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने अपने अकॉर्ड से किसी लैंग्वेज को डाल दिया. दैट इज नॉट एग्जांपल ऑफ रीजनिज्म. अगर ये डिमांड आ रही होती किसी रीजन से, वो अपने आप को या तो अलग करना चाह रहे होते या उनकी कोई एक एज अ यूनिट डिमांड होती, तब इसको आप एग्जांपल बोल सकते हो. हर कोई डिमांड थोड़ी होगी. वो दैट कुड बी, बट वाज दैट अ डिमांड ऑफ एनी ऑफ दोज मूवमेंट्स? दैट यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड. It could be, and it could be related, although you will not say directly, because उन्होंने directly demand नहीं करी. देखो, ये this class is not on issue specific to regionalism. This class is a more general class on answer writing. Right? I'll show you another question. Look at this question. ये हटा दो मिनट. This. Now, relatively straightforward question. It says the PM Asha scheme is aimed at improving procurement mechanism as well as ensuring remunerative prices for farmers. In this context, highlight the various components of the scheme and discuss the concerns associated with it. Now tell me, what do you understand from this question? क्या पूछ रहे हैं आपसे? सवाल क्या है? स्कीम के फीचर्स नहीं बताने, वंस अगेन दोबारा पढ़ो. वेरियस कंपोनेंट्स ऑफ द स्कीम, फीचर नहीं, कंपोनेंट्स ऑफ द स्कीम, वो एंड डिस्कस द कंसर्न्स एसोसिएटेड विद इट. दैट मीन्स अगर आपको पीएम आशा स्कीम पता है क्या है, right? PM Asha scheme is you can say an umbrella category which includes multiple interventions. Those will be the components of the scheme. You have to discuss them and you have to discuss the challenges associated with each of those components. It's a 10 marker, 10 नंबर का ये क्वेश्चन है. Now, कितने लोगों को PM आशा स्कीम के बारे में पता है? How many of you know PM आशा स्कीम? अन्नदाता आय संरक्षण अभियान है. दिस इज द फुल नेम. नाउ व्हाट डज दैट मीन? अन्नदाता की आय संरक्षण का मतलब क्या हुआ? अन्नदाता कौन है? आय संरक्षण का मतलब क्या? You want to protect their incomes, right? Do you know, does anyone know what PM Asha is all about? कुछ आइडिया है? ओके, थोड़ा इसका ब्रीफ बैकग्राउंड मैं आपको देता हूं. In agriculture, there is this phenomenon of what we call price support. Indian agriculture में we have something called price support mechanisms. Price support mechanism होता क्या है? What is a price support mechanism? Yes. Price support का meaning क्या? Somebody is supporting prices. What does it basically mean? In the context of Indian agriculture, right? If market prices fail, what does market prices failure mean? If you allow Indian agriculture to be operated on the basis of a free market economy, wherein the consumers and the producers, they meet at a certain point in time or at a certain place and set the prices, right? That's what happens in a free market economy. In a free market economy, this is price per unit and this is quantity. This is your demand curve, this is your supply curve. Wherever the demand curve and supply curve intersects, you have a certain P naught. Prices are set in a market, right? People are going to come with their produce to the market. Other people who want this produce are also going to come with in the market. Depending on how much of this quantity is required, what quality is required, right? People are going to buy this at a certain price. Prices will be set in the market. Now, market price failure का मतलब क्या है? If the price which is set by the market, if the market price is less than, not equal to, is less than the cost of production plus premium, it is going to be called a market price failure, which is to say farmers who are engaged in producing the farm produce, when they sell it in the open market, the prices that they realize, if the market price is less than their cost of production plus the profit margin. Premium मतलब profit margin. कोई भी production में engage इसीलिए करेगा क्योंकि उसको profit चाहिए, right? आप benevolent, अगर आप अलग philanthropist हो तो अलग बात होगी, but in a market economy, any producer is going to engage in the act of production only and only for this part, which is profit. अगर market price ऐसी है that you are not even realizing your cost of production, let alone this profit margin, we say that the market prices have failed these farmers. This market price failure has a certain impact. What is the impact on the market price failure? It has a certain impact on farmers in the country. You have to realize that in the country, 86% of your agricultural households are small and marginal. In this country, you have to realize that per hectare income from crop farming per year is roughly around 46,000, which is to say, बहुत ही कम पैसे आपको मिलते हैं crop farming से. Second thing you have to realize is 45% of your workforce is involved in agriculture. Now, 45% of your workforce involved in crop farming is realizing prices which is not even enough to meet their cost of production, let alone profits. Do you think this will make farming you can say a lucrative pursuit? Nahi karega. That is one. People are going to withdraw from farming. That is one possible aspect. The other possible aspect is whatever market prices farmers realize, यही market prices में कुछ part जाएगा उनकी subsistence में, for them to sustain themselves. Some part which is left out of it is then going to be engaged in the next year's production cycle. नेक्स्ट ईयर के लिए भी खाद खरीदनी है, तुमको लेबर एंगेज करना है, तुमको इरिगेशन का कुछ पैसा देना है, ऑल्दो सब्सिडाइज्ड ही है, बट आपको पैसे ऐसे देने हैं तो कुछ इनपुट तो नेक्स्ट ईयर भी जाएगा. दैट मीन्स इफ आई डू नॉट रियलाइज इनफ मार्केट प्राइसेस इन दिस साइकिल, इट इज ऑल्सो गोइंग टू अफेक्ट प्रोडक्शन इन द नेक्स्ट साइकिल. जब मेरे पास इस साल के पैसे ही कम थे, एक तो ये कि मुझे फार्मिंग लुक्रेटिव नहीं लगेगी, कुछ लोग विड्रॉ भी करना चाहेंगे क्योंकि मुझे पैसे भी कम मिले, सो नेक्स्ट ईयर की प्रोडक्शन सफर करेगी, राइट. मैं नेक्स्ट ईयर कम उगा पाऊंगा. अगर मैं नेक्स्ट ईयर कम उगा पाऊंगा तो नेक्स्ट ईयर की सप्लाई के साथ क्या होगा, सप्लाई घटेगी. एंड फूड में इनकम इलास्टिसिटी ऑफ डिमांड, इनफैक्ट प्राइस इलास्टिसिटी इज ऑल्सो नॉट वेरी हाई. मतलब डिमांड तो बाय एंड लार्ज सेम रहेगी, मार्जिनली इंक्रीज करती है. डिमांड वही रही, सप्लाई घट गई तो प्राइसेस पे क्या होगा, प्राइसेस बढ़ेंगी, राइट. अब प्राइसेस बढ़ गई तो अब क्या होगा, मार्केट प्राइसेस बढ़ गई, दैट मीन्स अब फार्मर के पास सरप्लस ज्यादा है. क्योंकि मार्केट प्राइसेस बढ़ गई, एक तो उसको एक इंडिकेशन मिलती है कि ये चीज डिमांड में है, दूसरी मुझे ज्यादा बेहतर प्राइसेस मिली है और ये चीज डिमांड में है तो मैं क्या करूंगा, ज्यादा प्रोड्यूस करूंगा. अब नेक्स्ट ईयर मैंने ज्यादा प्रोड्यूस कर दिया, विच इज सप्लाई बढ़ गई, डिमांड तो मोरलेस कांस्टेंट रहती है, थोड़ी सी मार्जिनली इंक्रीज करेगी ऑन द अकाउंट ऑफ पॉपुलेशन ग्रोथ, मे बी सम इनकम ग्रोथ, थोड़ी सी डिमांड इंक्रीज करेगी, बट सप्लाई ज्यादा बढ़ गई. जब सप्लाई ज्यादा बढ़ गई, डिमांड वहीं के वहीं रही मान के चलो, तो क्या होगा, प्राइसेस पे प्राइसेस घटेंगी. तो इट इज गोइंग टू क्रिएट अ साइकिल ऑफ फ्लक्चुएशंस. देयर विल बी प्राइस फ्लक्चुएशंस. नाउ प्राइस फ्लक्चुएशंस हैज a morale boosting or a morale demotivating impact on farmers depending upon what the prices were. अच्छी हैं तो बढ़िया लगेगा, खराब हैं तो उनको demotivate करेगा. More importantly, it also has impact on market prices for the consumers. Consumers को एक साल टमाटर बहुत महंगे मिलते हैं, अगले साल टमाटर बहुत सस्ते मिलते हैं. And this is a phenomenon which is recurrent by the way. आप टमाटरों में देखो, आप प्याज में देखो, एक साल को देखिएगा बहुत बढ़ता है, अगले साल को देखिएगा बहुत घटता है. वो क्यों होता है? It is because in India, market prices are the only demand signals for most of our farmers. Farmers को ये नहीं पता exactly कि demand कितनी है. Farmers को ये नहीं पता कि बाकी लोग कितना produce कर रहे हैं. Farmers को ये नहीं पता कि किस quality की demand है. The only demand signal that farmers are getting is market prices. Price अगर अच्छी मिल गई तो farmer assume करता है कि demand अच्छी है. प्राइस अगर खराब मिल गई तो फार्मर अज्यूम करता है कि डिमांड खराब है. एंड डिपेंडिंग अपॉन व्हाट हिज अजम्पशन और एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ मार्केट डिमांड इज, ही एंगेजेस इन प्रोडक्शन. नाउ दिस वाइल्ड स्विंग इन मार्केट प्राइसेस, दिस वाइल्ड स्विंग इन सप्लाई आल्सो हैज एन इम्पैक्ट ऑन कंज्यूमर्स. देयरफॉर देयर इज अ केस दैट डेवलप्स फॉर सपोर्टिंग फार्मर्स, more specifically from the perspective of, one, your farmers already do not make a lot of money. Second, 45% of your workforce is involved in farming as an activity. Then, not farming, you will say agriculture as an activity. Then, there is an antecedent upon consumers also. Therefore, there has to be some intervention in this market. This intervention is what we call price support. Price support का मतलब क्या? The government says we are not going to allow the market prices to fail, or rather not this. You do not say, the government says we're not going to allow the market prices to fail. The government says if the market prices fail, which means if the market prices for your produce fall below a certain level where the farmer is not even able to realize his cost of production, then we are going to intervene. हम intervene करने वाले हैं, and we are going to procure this produce from these farmers at a price. And this price will take care of the cost of production. This price will also take care of some of these profit margins. That price is called a support price. इसको हम बोलते हैं support price, which is to say कि government बोलती है there is always a chance of market failure, right? अगर market fail होता है, it has an impact on the supply of farm produce. It has an impact on the farmer's income. It also has an impact on consumers because it will make food sometimes very unaffordable. Therefore, there emerges a case for the government to intervene in this market. The government says, if the market prices fail, we are going to enter this market and we are going to buy at a certain price, which will take care of both the cost of production and that of premium, right? We are going to procure it from the farmers. That means, technically speaking, the government is not allowing the market prices to fail per se. This mechanism is called a price support mechanism. Now you have to understand that the price support mechanism is only and only going to be implemented if there was a case of price support, which is अगर market prices fail करेंगी तभी तो government intervene करेगी. Story complicate होती है क्यों? सरकार ने ये तो बोला कि हाँ हम प्राइस सपोर्ट से एंटर करने वाले हैं. द सरकार ऑल्सो एडेड फूड सिक्योरिटी एज एन इंपॉर्टेंट ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ फूड पॉलिसी. फूड सिक्योरिटी का मतलब क्या? दैट वी आर नॉट गोइंग टू अलाउ पीपल टू स्लीप हंग्री. A lot of people cannot afford food. We are going to make sure that these people don't sleep hungry. To ensure food security, how is the government going to ensure कि लोग भूखे ना सोएं? या तो पैसे दे दो या तो खाना दे दो. सरकार पैसे नहीं देती, सरकार क्या देती है? खाना. थ्रू द पब्लिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सिस्टम. अब पब्लिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सिस्टम को ऑपरेट करने के लिए इफ आई हैव टू गिव फूड टू पीपल, आई हैव टू प्रोक्योर दिस फूड. So the government is also a captive buyer of this produce. There is a public distribution system. Under this public distribution system, which also now has a backing under NFSA, we have given certain legal entitlements to people. 5 kgs of food grains per person per month at a certain price. Rice, wheat and coarse grains के लिए this is 3, 2 and 1 per kg. हम इतने दामों पे आपको खाना देंगे. अब वो दे तभी पाएंगे जब वो प्रोक्योर करेंगे, राइट? Now सरकार ने बोला for me to meet my objective of food security, I am going to, you can say, strengthen my public distribution system because it was there in place पहले से ही, right? How? By procuring food items to be distributed as a part of this PDS system, right? Now this procurement had to happen at a certain price. This price used to be called the procurement price. अब फूड ग्रेन्स के लिए तुम्हारे पास 3 प्राइसेस हैं. एक प्राइस है मार्केट प्राइस, विच इज जब ओपन मार्केट में फार्मर बेचता है. दूसरी प्राइस है सपोर्ट प्राइस, मिनिमम सपोर्ट प्राइस, मतलब अगर मार्केट प्राइसेस फेल करती हैं तो सरकार इंटरवीन करके तुम्हें प्राइस सपोर्ट करेगी, राइट? कैसे? तुमसे खरीद के एट अ सर्टेन प्राइस कॉल्ड द मिनिमम सपोर्ट प्राइस, विच इज नॉर्मली क्या हमेशा ही प्री सोइंग सीजन डिक्लेयर करती जाती है. थर्ड प्राइस वाज कॉल्ड द प्रोक्योरमेंट प्राइस. Procurement price was meant for PDS because food security was also added as an objective for your food policy. Now, 3 prices for the same commodity creates an arbitrage. Imagine that the market prices fail. If the market prices fail, for the farmers, there are 2 mechanisms now. One is the mechanism of selling it to the government at the MSP or selling it to the government at the procurement price. The procurement price was usually in the middle of the market price and the minimum support price. Minimum support price was the floor price, सबसे कम, followed by the procurement price, which was higher, followed by the market price. Now, अगर farmer के पास 2 options हैं, to sell it at a procurement price or to sell it at a minimum support price, वो किस पे बेचना चाहेगा? वो procurement price पे ही बेचना चाहेगा. Soon the government realized this, कि ये 2 prices का कोई मतलब नहीं बनता. What we did was, we got rid of this procurement price. We said for us to support our PDS system, for me to procure rice and wheat primarily, the MSP will be the procurement price. Now you have 2 prices, market prices and the MSP in context of rice and wheat. Now this is a support mechanism. Support mechanism क्यों होना चाहिए? इसके बहुत सारे reasons हैं. पहला रीजन तो मैंने आपको बताया कि मार्केट प्राइसेस फेल करेंगी. दैट मींस फार्मर्स के ऊपर भी एक डाउनवर्ड प्रेशर भी आ सकता है, अपवर्ड प्रेशर भी आ सकता है, सप्लाई मार्केट में इन्फ्लुएंस हो सकती है, राइट? एक और रीजन गवर्नमेंट का इंटरवीन करने का ये भी है क्योंकि ये ट्रेड इज मोनोप्सोनिक. मोनोप्सोनिक का मतलब क्या? जैसे मोनोपोली होती है उसका ऑपोजिट इज मोनोप्सोनी. मोनोपोली का मतलब क्या? एक ही सेलर, बहुत सारे बायर्स. दैट मीन्स प्राइसिंग इज इन द हैंड ऑफ द सेलर. मोनोप्सोनी का मतलब क्या? एक ही बायर, बहुत सारे सेलर्स. इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पावर किसके हाथ में आ जाएगी? बायर के हाथ में. ना हमने एग्रीकल्चर मार्केटिंग ऐसे ऑर्गेनाइज करके रखी हुई है कि होलसेल प्रोड्यूस बिकता है सिर्फ और सिर्फ एपीएमसी में, मंडी में ही बिक सकता है होलसेल प्रोड्यूस. और मंडी को ऑपरेट करने के लिए वी हैव सर्टेन फ्यू फंक्शनरीज. दीज फंक्शनरीज आर लेसर, फार्मर्स आर far too many. This makes sure, or you can say this creates a condition where the pricing power is more in the hands of these buyers rather than in the hands of these farmers. So that may create a situation of exploitation, that they will buy lesser from the farmers and they are going to sell it at a higher market price, which typically happens. 40 रुपए की तुम भिंडी खरीदते हो, उसमें फार्मर को क्या मिलता है? 2 रुपए, 3 रुपए, 4 रुपए, 5 रुपए, यही मिलता है. जो बीच का स्प्रेड है, ये बीच का स्प्रेड बहुत ज्यादा है, राइट? तो इस स्प्रेड को कम करना भी एक ऑब्जेक्टिव है, विच इज ऑल्सो अ रीजन व्हाई द गवर्नमेंट शुड इंटरवीन. multiple reasons why the government should intervene. But you have to understand there is something called a price support mechanism. Now, price support mechanism gave you a certain price which is called the MSP, the minimum support price. Minimum support price is announced pre-sowing season से पहले for 22 crops and 2 crops जिनकी MSP linked होती है इन 22 crops के साथ. For sugar you have an FRP, not an MSP. Right? You have basically, you announce it for 22 crops, but 2 crops are also antecedental. Right? Now, there are certain crops for which there is MSP. ये complicate होता है system through PDS. PDS में क्या हो रहा है? PDS में हमने बोल दिया MSP is also the procurement price. Under the PDS, we made sure there were certain developments that happened. पहला कि हमने PDS में बोला कि जो प्रोक्योरमेंट है ये सिर्फ सेंट्रल एजेंसीज नहीं करेंगी, अब स्टेट भी कर सकती है, विच इज कॉल्ड डिसेंट्रलाइज्ड प्रोक्योरमेंट. प्रोक्योरमेंट अंडर पीडीएस वी ऑल्सो मेड इट ओपन एंडेड. ओपन एंडेड का मतलब क्या? तुम्हें जितना बेचना है तुम हमको बेच दो, सब्जेक्ट टू सर्टन फ्यू मिनिमल क्वालिटी नॉर्म्स. However much you want to sell to the government is going to buy from you. That means what? That means procurement will be rice and wheat heavy. Right? Procurement is rice and wheat heavy. And in case of rice and wheat, the government does not wait for a market price failure to procure this. Get this? Minimum support price is a support price, which should be only and only triggered if there is a market failure. But for rice and wheat, it gets triggered automatically. Why? Because there is an NFSA. We have to procure a lot of rice and wheat. For a lot of rice and wheat to be procured, we procure it at an MSP. And there is also an open-ended procurement. Right? So, your price support mechanism थोड़ा सा complicate हो जाता है. For the remaining crops के साथ intervention तभी होगी if at all there is a market price failure, not other than that. This is the price support scheme. Now, price support scheme is only for MSP notified crops. Now, MSP notified crops are only 24. इसके अलावा भी crops होती हैं, right? For other crops, you have another intervention which is called the market intervention scheme. Market intervention scheme is for non-MSP notified crops. ये थोड़ा ना ढंग से समझना होता है. Remember, MSP was a support mechanism but became a procurement price also for rice and wheat. So for rice and wheat, there is assured procurement. The MSP in case of rice and wheat is not triggered if there is a market price failure. There is an assured procurement that happens. For this price support to work for all other MSP notified crops, this price support scheme is only and only going to be triggered if there is a market price failure, subject to certain few conditions. Condition क्या होंगी? If the market prices fail, the state government has to request the central government that market prices are failing. For in case if it's for an MSP notified crop, the central government is going to impose a certain few conditions on the state. The conditions would be that, for example, 50% of the MSP or 50% of the procurement, in the context of MSP notified crops, the central government is going to say that you are going to assist with us, right? According to certain guidelines, which are called PSS guidelines, right? The central government is only and only going to procure 25% of state का production estimate. Remember, ये trigger तब होगा जब market fail करेगी तब, for MSP notified. अगर जो क्रॉप्स एमएसपी नोटिफाइड नहीं हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल हॉर्टिकल्चरल क्रॉप्स व्हिच हैव अ लोअर शेल्फ लाइफ, उन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में वी हैव दिस स्कीम व्हिच इज कॉल्ड द मार्केट इंटरवेंशन स्कीम. द मार्केट इंटरवेंशन स्कीम आल्सो विल बी ट्रिगर्ड इफ द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट मेक्स अ रिक्वेस्ट टू द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. Right? The central government has certain conditions. Conditions are: one, if the market prices have dipped more than 10% below what the previous year's average was, or if the production has happened more than 10% of previous year's average was. These are the two conditions, right? Subject to these two conditions, the central government is going to consider this case whether they want to intervene in this market for non-MSP notified crops or not. And if it intervenes, 50% of the procurement cost has to be borne by the states. Responsibility of disposal is also with the states. If there are any profits, the state can keep it, right? But these are subject to conditions. There is another scheme which is called the Price Stabilization Fund. The Price Stabilization Fund is not operated by the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare. नहीं, ये operate करता है Department of Consumer Affairs. This is from the perspective of consumers. Sometimes you would have noticed that कांदा के prices, onions के दाम बढ़ जाते हैं, supply market में कम होगी, right? From the perspective of consumers, if the market prices of certain few commodities are very high, the central government may intervene, the central government may procure these commodities or create a stock of these commodities and then flood the market with these commodities to normalize the prices. In this context, the central government can also import those commodities. Previous दो context में import नहीं होता. These are your various interventions. Primarily speaking, you have three interventions: the price support scheme, the market intervention scheme, and the price stabilization fund. All of these three schemes should be triggered only and only if there is a market price failure. The market price failure means that the farmers are not getting enough compensation which will recover their cost of production and also give them a certain profit margin. Now, all of these schemes get complicated because in context of rice and wheat, you had the MSP acting also as the assured procurement price. Now that had certain few problems. It created a certain few problems. MSP ने कुछ problems create किया. पहला problem MSP ने क्या create किया? First problem was that since assured procurement happens only and only for rice and wheat, जब rice and wheat का assured procurement है, open-ended procurement है, तो लोग क्या उगाएंगे? Rice and wheat ही उगाएंगे. Right? People work according to incentives. If the incentive is that, oh, I'm going to engage in cropping 12 crops, only 2 of which are going to be procured assuredly by the government at a certain price, which also gives me a profit margin, I'm going to engage in cultivating only these. So most of your agricultural system became the rice and wheat system. Areas where rice and wheat should not have been growing are also growing rice and wheat. Why? Because there is an assured procurement. So people are going to respond to these incentives. This also has an impact on nutrition, dietary diversity भी तुम्हारी कमजोर हो गई. It will of course also have an impact on the ecology. Right? For example, wheat was not the staple crop of Punjab. Maize was. But right now Punjab is pretty much the wheat bowl of the country. Right? Wheat वहाँ उगता है. Rice तो पंजाब में उगाना बनता ही नहीं था. But rice भी पंजाब में उगाया जाता है. Right now the condition in Punjab is, if I'm not mistaken, 5% of land in Punjab has already become desertified. Right? That is a problem. It is going to create a certain problem. So there will be ecological degradation. There will be problem with respect to nutritional diversity also. Your entire system is going to look like a rice and wheat system. Another problem that it creates is from the perspective of, जो MSP की problem दूसरी है वो ये है कि ये आपका food subsidy bill बढ़ाता है. कैसे? Food subsidy होती क्या है? Food subsidy is the government trying to subsidize food for you. ये कहाँ से आएगा? NFSA के अंदर आएगा. NFSA में मैंने बोला 75% of my rural population, 50% of my urban population is now entitled, legally entitled to 5 kgs per person per month at 3 rupees, 2 rupees, 1 rupees per kg. Under the NFSA, there was a provision that after every 3 years, you may subject this price to be revised. ये 3 rupees, 2 rupees per 1 rupee per kg. This price has not been revised. जबकि MSP हर साल अनाउंस होता है, प्री सोइंग सीजन अनाउंस होता है, एंड 2018 ऑनवर्ड्स तो वी आर नाउ गिविंग देम 150% ऑफ A2 plus FL, विच इज से 50% का प्रॉफिट मार्जिन इज अश्योर्ड. हर साल MSP रिवाइज होता है अपवर्ड्स, जबकि जो सेलिंग प्राइस है फॉर द गवर्नमेंट इन टर्म्स ऑफ फूड ग्रेन्स वो रिवाइज नहीं होती. इनफैक्ट अंडर PM प्रधानमंत्री गरीब कल्याण योजना दिस वाज डाउनवर्ड्सली रिवाइज टू 0. दैट मीन्स हर साल आप खरीद महंगे पे रहे हो और बेच उसी दाम पे रहे हो, या तो 0 में रहे हो. That means what? That means the food subsidy bill is going to rise roughly around 2 lakh crores. अब अगर तुम्हारा 2 लाख करोड़ सिर्फ फूड सब्सिडी में जा रहा है, now the resources with the state are limited, right? 2 लाख करोड़ मेरा जाता है सब्सिडी में, तो मैं केपेक्स क्या करूंगा एग्रीकल्चर में? How much money do I have to invest in capital expenditure? Right? Should I be investing in irrigation? Should I be investing in constructing, you can say, logistic facilities, improving the supply chain? All of that capital expenditure, which could have made my agriculture so much more productive, that becomes the opportunity cost. Why does that become the opportunity cost? Because the food subsidy burden is so high, leaving very little resources for me to be investing in capital expenditure in the context of agriculture. That means capex suffers. Now capex suffers, that means the productivity of agriculture in the country continues to stay low. We are a low productivity, high production subsystem. मतलब हम produce बहुत ज़्यादा करते हैं, but हम productive कम हैं. That means our prices are not going to be competitive when we compare it in the world trade system. across multiple commodities in terms of the total production that India makes, we will be in the top 10. But we are not cost competitive when it comes to world trade. Why are we not cost competitive? Because we are not producing them productively. Our productivity is low, which means we are a very input intensive driven economy, which is say बहुत ही ज़्यादा inputs हम डालते हैं to produce the amount that we are producing. We are not focusing on efficiency. Why are we not focusing on efficiency? Because you don't have enough money for it. A lot of your money goes into food subsidy. And this is the problem. Another problem with respect to MSP was because there is an open-ended procurement. That means bring me whatever rice and wheat you can, I'm going to buy it. Because I'm going to buy it, it is always going to be more than my requirements. For me to operate my PDS, I have two kinds of requirements. I have an operational requirement and I have an emergency requirement, buffer stock. मैं हमेशा प्रोक्योर करता हूं इससे बहुत ज्यादा. अब अगर मैं इससे बहुत ज्यादा प्रोक्योर करता हूं, डू आई हैव इनफ स्टोरेज फॉर इट? स्टोरेज के लिए भी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर लगाना पड़ेगा. बहुत ज्यादा स्टोरेज मेरे पास है नहीं. अ लॉट ऑफ फूड गोज टू वेस्ट. देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स क्रिएटेड बाय द एमएसपी सिस्टम. Now a lot of academicians thought of other interventions which could be a solution to this problem. One of those interventions was, for example, the price deficiency payment system. What does the price deficiency payment system talk about? The price deficiency payment system means that I don't have to really operate or I don't have to really procure. I will allow a free market economy to function, which is to say farmer जाए अपना produce बेचे. जैसे उसने अपना प्रोड्यूस बेचा वो बिकेगा मार्केट प्राइस पे. इफ द मार्केट प्राइस इज लेस देन द एमएसपी, द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द एमएसपी एंड द मार्केट प्राइस बिकम्स माय डेफिसिट प्राइस. एंड यही प्राइस मैं दे दूंगा फार्मर को. मतलब मुझे खरीदना नहीं है उससे, तू बेच, मार्केट में जा, मार्केट प्राइस पे बेच. अगर तुम्हारी मार्केट प्राइस मेरे एमएसपी से कम है तो जो भी ये डिफरेंशियल है मैं ये तुम्हें अमाउंट दे दूंगा. I don't have to maintain more than what my operational and emergency requirements are. मुझे कुछ खर्चा नहीं करना in terms of storage. This was thought of as one solution. Another solution which was thought of was, it's called the private procurement or the stockist scheme. Private procurement or the stockist scheme का मतलब क्या? अभी MSP पे खरीदता कौन है? It is the government. If you want to create a thick market, why don't you allow private parties also to buy at an MSP? Right? Why should it only be the government? सिर्फ गवर्नमेंट ही क्यों खरीदे? तुम किसी नोटिफाइड, प्री नोटिफाइड और सिलेक्टेड प्राइवेट पार्टीज को भी अलाउ करो कि तुम भी खरीदो यार. सो इट हेल्प्स मी शेयर माई बर्डन. राइट? व्हाई शुड द गवर्नमेंट ओनली बी रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर मेंटेनिंग प्राइस स्टेबिलिटी? If the private parties think that this is a decent enough price to be paid, MSP, and because MSP is announced pre-season, so that also gives them price predictability. If they feel that this is a genuine price that I can pay, why should the government only be engaging in buying at an MSP? The private parties should also do it, right? The problem is if the private parties do it, then the private parties will have to store this produce because they are going to be buying it in bulk. If they are storing it in a bulk or if they are stocking this, there are certain norms under the ECA, the Essential Commodities Act, कि आप कितना स्टॉक कर सकते हो, because that will lead to market made obstructions, which is why you have to relax certain ECA norms to allow private parties to also stock whatever they are buying. And this was another scheme. बहुत सारे एक market assurance intervention है. There are multiple solutions to this problem. PM आशा क्या है? PM आशा basically include कर देता है इसको, include कर देता है इसको, and include कर देता है price support scheme को. Right? Price support scheme, PDPS, प्राइवेट प्रोक्योरमेंट, ये तीन पहले थे. अब उन्होंने दोनों और ऐड कर दिए हैं जो बाकी वाले हैं, प्राइस स्टेबलाइजेशन फंड एंड ऑल्सो मार्केट इंटरवेंशन स्कीम. इन सारी स्कीम्स को कंबाइन करके बोला जाता है पीएम आशा. राइट? उसने क्या पूछा आपसे? सवाल पूछा है, दिस पीएम आशा स्कीम इज नेसेसरी फॉर रेम्यूनरेटिव इनकम ऑफ फार्मर्स एंड आई थिंक ऑल्सो फूड सिक्योरिटी. ये बताओ और इसके चैलेंजेस बताओ. चैलेंजेस भी हैं इन सबके. चैलेंजेस क्या हैं? जैसे एक तो तुम बताओगे कि प्राइस सपोर्ट स्कीम शुड ओनली हैव बीन ट्रिगर्ड इन केस ऑफ अ मार्केट प्राइस फेलियर, बट फॉर राइस एंड व्हीट यू आर नॉट वेटिंग फॉर द मार्केट फेलियर, यू आर प्रोक्योरिंग इट. राइट? ओपन एंडेड प्रोक्योरमेंट है. दैट मीन्स अ लॉट ऑफ योर मनी इज गोइंग. यू कैन टॉक अबाउट द प्रॉब्लम्स ऑफ MSP इन केस ऑफ राइस एंड व्हीट देयर. You also will talk about in context of the limits which are imposed. For example, both under the market intervention scheme and also under the price, the other one, the price stabilization fund, rather the market intervention scheme and the PSS, both of them, The state government has to make a request. The central government has to approve the request subject to certain few conditions, and even after that, the central government does not procure all of it. The state has to share a certain burden. A lot of time gets wasted in the process. Now, in this time frame where the market prices are crashing, you will have a lot of private players who are going to buy at a very low price. बहुत ज़्यादा time waste होता है, right? तो इस time waste को भी आपने take care करना है. That is also a problem. There is a problem also with price deficiency payment. Price deficiency payment की problem क्या है? Problem ये है कि जब private parties को पता ही है कि deficient price तो सरकार देगी, तो वो क्यों तुम्हें बेहतर prices देंगे? If I know that ये रहा MSP, हर साल MSP अनाउंस होता है, पब्लिक डोमेन में होता है, मुझे पता है MSP कितना है, राइट? मुझे ये भी पता है अगर MSP लेट्स से 1800 रुपए पर क्विंटल है राइस के, मैं 1800 दूंगा ही नहीं, मैं 1400 ही दूंगा उसको मार्केट में. क्यों? मुझे पता है कि 400 तो सरकार दे ही देगी, राइट? व्हाट इज द इंसेंटिव फॉर द प्राइवेट प्लेयर टू गिव यू मोर देन दिस MSP? व्हाई वुड दे गिव यू मोर देन द MSP? एंड द फार्मर इज ऑल्सो गोइंग टू बी हैप्पी. फार्मर बोलेगा बढ़िया, मेरे को तो सरकार से मिल ही जाएगा, राइट? So that creates a problem, that creates an incentive for the private parties never to give you any more than the MSP. In fact, they were always going to get you for a discount, depending upon the conditions. हो सकता है क्या पता कुछ सप्लाई ही बहुत कम है, अगर आपको दिखता है कि there is a huge chance for me to make windfall gains, तब वो शायद आपको MSP से ज़्यादा भी देते. बट जब मुझे पता है कि सरकार तुमको डेफिसिट पेमेंट तो दे ही देगी, तो मैं तुमको ज़्यादा क्यों दूँ MSP से? Why should I give you that? Another problem is सरकार को इन प्राइसेस के बारे में पता कैसे चलेगा कि मार्केट प्राइसेस हैं क्या? The data is only and only going to be coming from APMCs, marketing committee से data आएगा. That means only in those states where there is marketing infrastructure, only from those places you're going to get data. Right? So data collection is only going to be strengthened only and only where there is a marketing infrastructure. States like Bihar, states like UP, where farmers have to come across the borders and sell it in Punjab and Haryana, they are going to be at a, you can say, a disadvantage. So that is a problem. There is also a problem with respect to private procurement, the same problem with respect to hoarding and eventually fluctuating market prices. If the private parties come together, if they cut lies, and if they stock a lot of this supply, they are going to, you can say, fluctuate the market prices to their own advantage also. There is always a risk of that. Right? अदानी आ गया, बहुत सारा सामान ले लिया और अपने पास स्टोर कर दिया, वेट के एक आर्टिफिशियल स्कार्सिटी क्रिएट करी, जहां आर्टिफिशियल स्कार्सिटी क्रिएट करी फिर मुंह मांगे दामों पे बेचा भी. That is also a problem. You have to only discuss what PM Asha is, what are the components of PM Asha, and सबके अपने अपने challenges and drawbacks. First आपको link करना होगा इसको कि ये क्यों required है. You know a lot. Now that you know a lot, you have to condense it down into a 10 marker, a 150 words. Look at what Ayan has done. He has scored the highest, if I'm not mistaken, in GS3. And I'm particularly impressed by his answers. Right? He says the National Food Security Act has laid out many objectives for procurement and farmers' support. PM Asha is one such scheme, although not really. Right? Then components of PM Asha: transparent mechanism to procure food grains, minimum wastage of food grains, improved storage of transport facilities, reduced role of middlemen, remunerative prices for the issue price. None of these are components of PM Asha. None of them are the components of PM Asha. Right? The components of PM Asha, I have told you what these components are. In fact, तब तक 3 ही होंगे by the time he would have written this, and अब 2 और add कर दिए गए. Right? Then he talks about administrative leakages, this and that. Then concerns associated with PM Asha. What are the concerns? Administrative leakages, presence of corruption and malpractices, hoarding and adulteration. Although you may link it with, you should have said for the private procurement and stockist scheme, this is a problem. You could have highlighted that. Price support to farmers is inadequate. Now if you're announcing the MSP, how is it inadequate? Because MSP is 150% of A2 plus FL. That means 50% का profit margin तो आपको है ही. That is one. There is a debate कि A2 plus FL होना चाहिए या C2 होना चाहिए, but right now you're also giving them 50% profit margins. Lack of targeting of beneficiaries. Poor farmers should get more benefit. How do you do that? You could have said that in something like a price deficiency payment scheme. Price deficiency payment scheme is only going to extend the benefit of MSP to areas where there is an adequate marketing infrastructure. क्योंकि वहीं तो आपको deficient price पता चलेगी. That means not all farmers are going to get the benefits of MSP. You could have talked about that. Follow it up with Questions are being raised on transparency. I don't know. Right? Followed by centralized mechanism, something, something, something. Right? He has written this down. Now, you have to understand that sometimes toppers may also not be producing great answers. He's ranked 16. The point is not to tell you and show कि देखो यार ये तो गलत आंसर लिखा है, या मैंने वही आंसर सिलेक्ट किया हो कि नहीं नहीं देखो ना कितना खराब आंसर लिखा है. Sometimes if you don't know a certain question and if you only know PM आशा का मीनिंग क्या होता है, right? आय संरक्षण, तो जो भी आपको पता है रेम्यूनरेटिव प्राइसेस के बारे में आप एक आंसर कंस्ट्रक्ट करके दे सकते हो. Once again, इंट्रोडक्शन, कंक्लूजन. कंक्लूजन में भी उन्होंने अशोक दलवाई कमेटी डाली थी क्योंकि उन्होंने रेम्यूनरेटिव इनकम बोला हुआ है कि अशोक दलवाई कमेटी इज ऑन डबलिंग फार्मर्स इनकम. बट यू कुड हैव रिटन अ मच बेटर आंसर. If you now have to write a much better answer down, what will you talk about? You will talk about PM Asha is an umbrella scheme that includes the following subcomponents. Give them the names of each of these subcomponents and define each of those subcomponents. You don't have to get into the details of it कि 50% ही सरकार करेगी, 10% market prices होनी चाहिए, नहीं. You will talk about how price support scheme is only and only for MSP notified. Right? You will talk about how market intervention scheme is for non-MSP notified. You will talk about how the PSF, Price Stabilization Fund, is not a scheme from the Ministry of Farmers and Agriculture Corporation. उनके नहीं है. It is from the Department of Consumer Affairs. So that takes care of the consumer interests. If you want to एक दो और लाइन आप ऐड करना चाहो कर सकते हो. Then you have to talk about the drawbacks. First आपको बोलना होगा कि why is this important. Therein you talk about price support mechanism, क्यों important होता है, specifically in the context of Indian agriculture, where food security is also an added objective. So you have to talk about what percentage of your workforce is involved in crop farming. Then you talk about how crop farming is not very remunerative. Then you talk about how, if the market prices fail, what is that going to do in terms of farmers' incomes, farmers' morals, and also in terms of price fluctuations in the coming sowing cycles. That price fluctuation is also going to affect affordability and hence is also going to affect consumer interests. So it's not just about farmers' incomes, it is also about consumer interests too. एक आधा point अपनी तरफ से डाल दिया. Then you talk about, yes, it's a great intervention. However, each of those subcomponents, you find components, सबका अपना अपना एक drawback बताओ, आपका answer done. Get this? इनका एक अच्छा आंसर है, which is about inequality. Right? Despite efforts by successive governments, equitable growth remains elusive and income inequality persists in India. Discuss. It's a 15 marker. Yeah. How much? How much area of India agriculture is going on in terms of net sown area? I would not have a number. I would have a number on how much is procured by the government. वो मुझे पता है. Net sown area, I don't know. Not now. Not exactly. Why though? It should have been a leading question. Why? Food quality and production. Like what? What? Food quality and production in agriculture. Like what is the question though? It is good quality or it's not. That depends upon who the eventual consumer is. It's not always a question of quality. Not related right now. I thought you were asking me in context of food quality for PDS. Like under PDS, the food quality norms are basic norms. For example, moisture content specify कर दिया जाता है, थोड़ा बहुत weight specify कर दिया जाता है, बहुत basic norms रखे जाते हैं, बहुत high norms नहीं होते. In terms of general food quality, of course, there will be adulteration because it is an input-intensive farming. But of course, how is that related to this discussion? Anyway, the idea was, if you look at this specific question, which is, despite the efforts of successive governments, equitable growth remains elusive and income inequality persists. He talks about the PLFS has pointed out various issues in India in terms of employment status, factors which determine employment situation in the country in the long run. And this is about employment status, I guess. Oh no, मैंने गलत आंसर उठा लिया. Now, this was about inequality. What I remember from his point was, he started with the basic definition of inequality. Then he gave you a brief description of income inequality in the country or efforts by the government. In terms of discussing efforts by the government, he mentioned a few points. did not mention land reforms for that matter. So land reform was a great case in case of reducing inequality in the country. He spoke about various schemes, for example, employment guarantee schemes, upskilling schemes. He also talked about the idea of universal basic income, which is being contemplated, of course, has not been implemented just yet. He gave a fair understanding of what income inequality was. Then, to discuss that income inequality still persists in India, he used certain few indicators which basically reflect that he knows the vocabulary of the subject. He used the Gini coefficient, he used the Palma ratio, he also used the S20 ratio. Now, ideally speaking, some person who's going to write on income inequality or inequality in a paper in GS3 should always talk about these ratios. If you think about income inequality, there are indicators. One symbolic indicator is the Lorenz curve. The Lorenz curve is only a visual depiction, followed by the Gini coefficient 0 to 1, which is derived from the Lorenz curve itself, followed by certain ratios. There are certain quintile ratios, decile ratios, Palma ratios. These are all specific indicators of inequality, and he used these indicators. He did not say top 1% in the country owns 90% of the country's wealth, this and that. वो भी उसने लिखा है. But he used the vocabulary of the subject, because inequality could be a question in social justice also. Since this was a question which was asked in GS3, he made sure that his answer looks like it's an economics ka answer, followed by his various initiatives that he spoke about. मैंने शायद एक गलत आंसर इस पे अपलोड कर दिया है, but I remember I was particularly impressed by this, which is to say, if you are discussing, let's say, a question on the PM Asha scheme, you're not going to be only talking about, oh, farmers are not making any income, oh, farmers are 45%, oh, we have to give them more income, oh, they should not be poor. You have to use the vocabulary of this specific, you can say, this issue, which is that of minimum support price, which we will talk about how price support gets triggered only if there is a market price failure. Mention market price failure, underline it. Right? You also talk about the various issues associated with it in terms of how this is going to affect the capex. Right? Write the word capex down there, capital expenditure, underline it so that you highlight to the examiner that I'm not answering this from a very general perspective. I know a certain few terms of this specific context. Make it look like it's a GS3 answer. The more you make your answers look like they are that subject ka answer, not something else, the more you're going to fetch marks. He has scored the highest, if I'm not mistaken, in GS3. The highest. And you saw there is an answer that he has written, which was basically, for the lack of a better word, pretty much made up. Right? You have to make sure that your idealism gives way to what is called realism. For you to make sure that you're scoring the most, your ideal expectations should always guide you. Yes, my answer should have content which is relevant to the demands of the question. Yes, my answer should also be balanced. Yes, my language should be simple and lucid. Yes, I should have examples, I should have factoids, I should have data. Yes, I should also focus on the coherence of the structure as a whole. I should focus on all of that. But when I'm put in a certain context, when I have 20 questions to attempt in 3 hours, some of those things also get thrown out of the window and you do not have to worry about those. Don't worry about those. Focus on the following things. First, maximizing the number of questions that you want to attempt. Try to pick a more than average across each question so that your aggregate is more than most people's. Then you focus on the specifics of answer writing, which is one, read the question very carefully, understand the question very well. Now, understanding flows from your understanding of the subject. It is not then and there कि आपको magically समझ में आता है. No. The more you know about that specific subject, for example, if I know so much about PM Asha, I am of course inclined to write a better answer on PM Asha. If I know so much about regionalism, of course, I will understand that question. What is he trying to talk about? He's trying to build a positive case for regionalism, but I also know that no, it's not always positive. So you have to start from reading itself, right? What you are going to write in your answer scripts there is eventually a function of how much you know. But that leads people to believe that they should focus so much on reading only. And once they are satisfied that I know everything, then I'm going to start answer writing. That's not how it works. You have to first, for every subject, form a theoretical understanding of the most common topics. Understand that there is a certain language, there is a certain music to its language too. Society का answer ऐसा दिखता है. right? In families, when you talk about affective roles, you talk about something called an adult personality stabilization. These are terms which are used in that specific subject. Understand the music that a specific subject. Normally, my rule used to be that 1/3 of the subject covered, then I'm going to look at the questions which were asked previously. When I'm reading those questions down, whatever I know, I'm going to try to attempt the question basis what I know. Now, basis what I know, I will have a certain answer. You will also have an explanation sheet, right? Compare your answer with the explanation sheet. If you are around what the explanation sheet was, and of course the explanation sheets will be bulky, they will have a lot of content. If you are loosely there, you are on the right track, right? You don't have to worry. इसको बोला जाता है कि some amount of preparation you should do, but some amount of preparation you should allow to happen to yourself. You will not know everything about everything, but that should not be reason enough for you to say, I'm not going to attempt this question. You should attempt that question. Whatever you write is the exact reflection of how much you really know about it, right? Then look at an answer sheet and then see what is the difference between the two. That is how you learn more things about that very same topic. It is also how you learn so much about data. What most people do is they start grounds up. They want to read industrial aggregate, the index of industrial production has said itna, the GDP growth ke numbers are itna. What are you going to do with these numbers? Only when you start writing your answers down, जब आप answers लिखते हो, when you are making a certain argument, right? And then if you have no data point for it, when you look at the explanation sheet and if it has some data point, if you feel that that data point, if I added, would have made it look so much better, right? Then that data point is something that you have to remember. You do not have to go grounds up. Start writing answers, build a very genuine expectation of what your answer should be like, have a very honest feedback on what you are writing, compare your answers with toppers, compare your answers with the model answers which are given, and then see what is the difference. Then work towards that difference. You, in the process, will discover the following things. First thing you will discover is you are finding it very, very hard to complete 20 answers in 3 hours, even if you know them. Even if you know 20 answers, you're going to find it very hard. So you have to first work on your speed. Then when you are done with your speed, then you have to think about, oh, I can write 20 questions in 3 hours, but when I write these questions down, I skip a lot of content, or I sometimes needlessly explain some points where I should have been adding other points. Then that has to be worked upon, right? Then you have to focus on concise writing. Now, in terms of concise writing, there is a certain format that you have to look at. The format that we have to look at is this. Dekho, presentation. Presentation, the first aspect is, should you pick a paragraph-wise format or should you pick a point-wise format? In general studies, always and always go for a point-wise format. 2 reasons. First reason is that it looks better. Second reason is that if you are writing a paragraph, you cannot build a paragraph from phrases. You have to write complete sentences down. It's only when you adopt a point-wise format that you can get away by writing only phrases and not complete sentences. Look at each of these, right? They are picking up what is called a point-wise format, which is sometimes you may not have enough time. So what you write down is the subheading, give an example. You could not have done it in a paragraph-wise format. Paragraph-wise format does not give you that leverage, right? So you have to think about this. Pick point-wise format wherever it is possible. In optionals, however, they expect you to elaborate a little bit more. In optionals, you should go for a paragraph format as far as possible, but in general studies, go for a point-wise format. 2 reasons. One, saves time. Second, looks very, very, you can say much better compared to a paragraph-wise format. That is one. Second is in terms of diagrams and maps. Now, diagrams and maps, you think of them as a necessary add-on. They are not mandatory. In fact, I have never seen a question in mains which asks you to draw a map, even if it's a geography-based question. कभी उन्होंने आगे से नहीं पूछा होता. It's a good to have. Good to have का मतलब, right? If I can, great. If I cannot, don't fret over it. Maps do not have to be used only in geography. You can use maps in IR context also. You can use maps in internal security also. You can even use maps in questions on economics. You can use maps in questions also on history. Right? If you look at it, this is a question on India's ports. Infrastructure is the topic, GS3. But he has used this map. Does this look exactly like India? No. It is not stencil accuracy, but this conveys the point. Right? So you don't have to worry too much about, oh, can I draw India accurately? Even if you loosely draw India, works. Look at this topper, Vidushi Singh. This is a question on cave paintings, art and culture. This is a question on Scramble for Africa, world history. Both cases, she drew a certain map. Is there a requirement? Did somebody ask her to do that? No. If you draw a map, sometimes you also save upon words. You can imagine somebody having written the exact same answer. Everything is the same. One person has drawn a map, the other person did not draw a map. There is every chance that this person who drew a map could have drawn a 0.5 extra. शायद 0.5 उनको और अच्छा मिल जाता. क्यों? दिखने में बेहतर लगता है. Right? As simple as it gets. Is it a deal breaker? No. Right? If you can use them, but don't use them too liberally. Remember, there is always very limited real estate. ये नहीं कि मैप ही मैप बनाते गए, जो लिखना था वो लिखा ही नहीं. Right? Use them. बहुत छोटे छोटे बना सकते हो. अब इनकी तो मेरे ख्याल से this is pretty well done in context of Africa. Looks very good. This looks pretty much like India, but ऐसा भी India चल जाता है. Right? You don't have to worry too much. Yeah, this is a question on Scramble for Africa. This basically started from the King of Belgium. So Belgium ke baad other European imperialist powers also discovered that, oh, Africa previously used to be thought of as the dark continent, not because of the color of the people, but because very little was known about the interiors. Cartography developed. King of Belgium sponsored a certain study. This person went, he discovered that Africa has a lot of resources. Belgium colonized it first, followed by other nations. Now other nations followed. Just a UK you will find pretty much here and there. France, this region. Belgium, middle one. Portugal here. Right? This is also the reason why the present political map of Africa looks like it has been drawn on through scales. Right? This was basically, if you can think of it as a, you may say, a scramble between European imperialist powers for resources in Africa itself. European powers in Africa. It could be. I mean, even if she did not label it, the person who knows world history will know that, yes, this is what she is trying to highlight. I'm telling you, think of an answer which is exactly the same. Everything is the same. One person has drawn a map, the other person has not. There is a chance that this person who has drawn a map may draw 0.5 extra. She will not draw 3 marks extra for this, maybe a 0.5 extra for this. Right? These are certain add-ons. Followed by other smart art. Smart art may include bar graphs, it may include pie charts, it may include graphs, it may include timelines, it may include what is called a hub and spoke model. Now, most people think smart art is only and only because it makes your answer look good. Not necessary. Smart art is a very smart way of reducing the amount of words that you're going to put in. If you look at it here, the question would have been about pottery, right? This person, Gautam Vivekanandan, he had the highest in General Studies 1 last year. He has only drawn a timeline in evolution. He has just drawn this model, Mesolithic and Neolithic age, handmade, Indus Valley civilization, red slipped ware. He is not explaining on any of these, yet he has highlighted how pottery would have evolved between ages. This saves upon time because you do not have to write complete sentences, also looks very good. Look at this one. Conceptual thing or? Depends on if the question is on mostly on analysis. See, most questions will be on issues, so highly analytical. Questions in geography sometimes may even be about a certain concept, or it'll be about factoids. Some questions in art and culture will be mostly about facts. In history also, they are asking you more or less analytical questions. So more focus on analysis, less focus on facts. But you have to remember this, analysis also does not happen independent of facts. If you're putting an argument down, you have to back it with a certain fact or a certain example. Right? You don't make it look like a GK ka book. You have to make it look like a very balanced analytical answer, but that has to be the demand of the question. जो पूछा गया है वही लिखना है. Most questions will be on issues and hence analytical. So focus mostly on analysis. You don't have to remember every fact. You should remember at least the relevant facts at least, right? वो बिल्कुल जैसे लूसेंट की किताब उठा के जी के रट दी वैसा नहीं करना होता. Broad themes को भी अगर आप कनेक्ट कर पाओ, if you have some relevant data points, you should use them. It does not mean कि analysis happens independent of facts. वो नहीं होता. अगर तुमसे कोई पॉटरी का एवोल्यूशन पूछे और अगर आपको बस पता ही नहीं है, आप बस बोल दो हाँ सिरामिक तक पहुंच गए, कैसे, कहाँ, you have to mention some facts. Do you have to write down know everything? Not necessary, but broadly भी अगर आपको periods पता है, you can mention them, right? Never think कि तुम्हें इस एग्जाम में मग अप नहीं करना होगा, करना ही होगा. Right? There is no way that you're going to escape that. But you should not focus solely on mugging up. You have to focus more on looking at the broader trends, looking at analysis. The analysis should be backed by certain facts. Yes, yes. Now shortcuts, there is this general question a lot of people ask about shortcuts. Acronyms rather, abbreviations rather, right? Now, if the abbreviation is very well known, for example, I don't have to write United Nations. Even if I write UN, most people will understand this is UN. Right? If I write a WHO, most people will know this is World Health Organization. If I write a WTO, most people would know. Normally, if you are bringing a certain abbreviation down, and the abbreviation is only something that you would understand, कहीं ना कहीं उसको mention करके आप explain करके लिख दो कि इसका meaning ये है, right? Some abbreviations are far more common. IMF लिखने के लिए आपको पूरा International Monetary Fund नहीं लिखना होता. Most people will understand this. But if this is an abbreviation that you used to have when you were studying, तुम्हें ही पता और किसी को नहीं पता, then you have to create a legend also. या फिर जब भी आपने उसको main body में mention किया होगा, उसी के बगल में bracket में डाल के आप लिख देते हैं IJW, so that he knows कि अच्छा IJW basically means that. Get this? You don't have to shy away from this. ऐसा नहीं कि आपको नहीं ही कर सकते. You can use it, but normally use it for more commonly used acronyms. Like if you are creating an acronym of your own, कहीं ना कहीं उसको mention करके लिख दो कि exactly इसका meaning ये है. Do not leave it for his own fancy. The other one is handwriting. Like I said, handwriting में there is only one recommendation, that handwriting has to be legible, which is say it should not look like a pharmacist or a doctor. Right? Some person who is reading your answer script is engaging in a very strenuous, boring task. He has to read multiple of these answer scripts in a day. If you are writing in a manner that most people do not understand it, right, he is obviously going to be irritated by it and he is going to mark you lesser. The only aspect you have to focus on is that your handwriting is legible or readable. पढ़ने में आती है, that's about it. Now, of course, there is a very famous saying of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde once said that between beauty and intelligence, I'm going to pick beauty because beauty has the sovereignty of being. Beauty does not have to prove itself. जो चीज़ beautiful है, उसको prove नहीं करना पड़ता कि मैं beautiful हूँ, दिख जाता है कि वो beautiful है. किसी की handwriting अगर बहुत सुंदर है, तो हो सकता है कि उसको थोड़ा सा advantage हो. बट ऐसा मेक डील ब्रेकर एडवांटेज नहीं होता कि अरे इसकी हैंडराइटिंग इतनी सुंदर है, कंटेंट इन्होंने बहुत ही हल्का लिखा है, पर क्योंकि हैंडराइटिंग बहुत अच्छी है तो इसको हम बहुत अच्छे मार्क्स देते हैं. दिस डज नॉट हैपन. इनफैक्ट अगर आपकी हैंडराइटिंग बहुत अच्छी है और आपका कंटेंट अप टू द मार्क नहीं है तो ज़्यादा बेहतर दिखेगा कि आपको पता नहीं है, बस हैंडराइटिंग अच्छी है. राइट, सो यू हैव टू फोकस ऑन दैट. The only thing you have to remember in context of handwriting is try to make it legible. दिखने में आनी चाहिए, पढ़ने में आनी चाहिए. Only that. Followed by pens. I don't think I would want to go into pens. Pick whatever suits your fancy. The only thing you have to keep in mind is seepage नहीं होनी चाहिए. If you are writing with a certain pen, वो छप के पीछे नहीं आ जाए कि वो पीछे के content को avoid कर दे. दूसरा, waterproof type की जो inks होती है ना, try to use them. कि अगर गलती से पानी वानी गिर गया उसके ऊपर, ये नहीं कि वो पूरा ही स्पिल होके क्या लिखा था पता नहीं चला. Right? Ordinarily, for some people, ballpoint pens work better. For some people, roller ball pens work better. For some people, other pens work better. There is no recommendation here. The only thing is pick between a black and a blue. That's about it. That's it. Nothing else. Right? Focus mostly on mock tests. Remember this. Start by writing one answer. Graduate to writing 5 answers. Graduate to writing 10 answers. By the 4th month, 5th month, or the 6th month, you should be writing full length tests. Now 20 answers, you cannot write every day. 20 answers per week is normally also a tall ask. So at least make sure in the early months of your preparation, at least write 2 full length tests a month, though, right? And when you're trying to write your mock tests down, please try to time yourself also. Have an honest assessment of how much can I write in 3 hours time? Should I be working on my speed or not? Do not try to cheat on your own self, right? Do not try to take help in the beginning itself. If you're writing ideal answers or perfect answers for a specific question, then you can take help, then you can take as much time. But if you're testing yourself, put yourself in the exact same exam environment that you're going to have when you're going to write your mains exam. Focus mostly on trends, right? Trends ka matlab kya? Marks ke trends pe focus karo. If you have gotten, let's say, a 70 in the first question paper, don't fret too much. Try to make sure that the next time I'm going to take a test on the same topics, I should be scoring more than 70 odd. The trend should be upwards, right? Followed by word limits. Now, word limit is an important area of concern. 10 markers, 150, 250 markers, sorry, 15 markers, 250 words. Is this a strict word limit? Absolutely not, right? Which is to say, no person actually counts the number of words that he's writing as and when he's writing. 7 minutes in itself is very little time for you to be counting words now. But when you're writing more than what the word limits are, if you're trying to be too cheeky, too clever, if you're trying to write in a very, very thoda chota manner, if you're trying to space the words down very cramped, right? If you're not leaving enough space between sentences, any person can look and tell that this is not a 150 mark word. That may invite a penalty, but even if it does not invite any penalty, it is going to be a penalty for you yourself. There are 20 questions to be answered in 3 hours. So if you're exceeding word limits by a stretch every time, you're not going to complete your papers, right? So you have to work 150 words. Ideally speaking, 200 tak aap chala hi jata. Most people go around a 150 to a 200 mark. If it's a 250 words, I have seen some people who have decent knowledge typically go about 315, 320 odd, right? Itna chala jata hai, no person reads this. Of course, अरे नहीं भी लिख सकते हो, चाहो तो नहीं कम भी लिख सकते हो. हाँ, one of my friends who got selected told me a trick. She said, if you have gotten a real estate, for example, if you get something like 2 pages, imagine it's a 10 marker, 2 pages. She said, try to use the entire real estate down, which is to say, you may have less content, but make sure that you do not leave, like you do not end here. Try to space your sentences so that you at least use it here. There is a psychological effect of this, that he knows enough, right? Try to use the real estate as much as possible. You can write lesser also. In fact, for questions which you don't know great answers to, you are of course going to write lesser than what is required, right? No penalty for that. Fill does not mean कि एकदम आखिरी कॉर्नर तक जाना है, but बहुत कम space छोड़ो. This was a hack that she told me. It has worked for her every time. I'm sure it may work for a lot of people too. If you have less content, try to spread it out, right? This is a hack. It's not really a recommendation, just a hack. And the last is, like I said, directive words. Directive words would mean words like explain, describe, words like elaborate, enumerate, analyze, right? Normally, my recommendation is that each of those words has a certain semantic meaning. Explain is different from describe. Describe is different from enumerate. Enumerate is different from analyze. Analyze is different from rate, right? All of these are different from critically explain. Now, practically speaking, what you have to focus on is this rule that I used to have. The rule that I used to recommend is there is an 80-20 and a 50-50 rule. That means for all descriptive words, unless they are preceded by the word critically, if the person has not told you to critically explain, critically discuss, critically analyze, the rule should be 80-20. 80-20 would mean that 80% of your answer should be exactly what he has asked you. 20% of your answer could be any additional but relevant content. For example, if somebody asks you issues with, let's say, the smart cities mission, the conclusion or some part of your answer, 20% of your answer, could also talk about solutions. Solutions are not asked directly, But because it gives a well-rounded appearance to your answer, that you're not only concerned by writing issues, you also know of certain few solutions, it gives a good balance to your answer. So the general rule should be 80-20, 50-50 in context only of every time he uses the word critically. Critically analyze, critically discuss, 50-50. 50-50 would mean that the first 50% of your answer has to go into reinforcing what he wants you to critically analyze. Now, what most people think about critically is critically matlab negative, positive. ऐसा नहीं होता है. Some questions do not even have the word critically in them, yet you have to do it a little bit critically. Critically का मतलब क्या है? Normally, over a certain phenomenon, people have a very polarized view. Critically would mean that you also have to have a certain contrarian view of the same. For example, there is a question on how does secularism impact, let's say, culture or traditions of India. Now, the question may ask you to critically discuss this. Now, secularism, most people think of secularism because it's a constitutional ideal. Most people read it positively. When he tells you to critically analyze it, that means you also have to think about certain drawbacks that this phenomenon may have. But because you know that it's a constitutional ideal, the solution or the conclusion eventually has to be more positive. This is what you have to understand. Critically, the word, where every time there is the word critically, the first 50% go into reinforcing the argument, the next 50% goes into refuting the argument. Like I said, if the question is critically discuss the impact of secularism on Indian culture and Indian traditions, the first 50%, because you would not expect somebody to ask you to criticize secularism as a concept. It does not mean that you have to write nothing against secularism too. It means he has asked you to critically analyze it. First, talk about how certain aspects of secularism in India has created a certain, you can say, issues, or it has created a discussion, a deliberation. For example, you may talk about how some people feel that it is an interference in their matter of the religion, right? The Jallikattu issue you can talk about. You can talk about the Sabrimala entry issue. You can also talk about how the Supreme Court, through the use of this doctrine, which is called the Essential Religious Practices Doctrine, has now become a papal authority of sorts. The Supreme Court is not focusing on the modern values of justice delivery through facts and evidence presented. The Supreme Court is asking whether this is central to the religion or not. Right? You have to discuss certain negative aspects too, then round it up by talking about what the importance of secularism is. Why is it a constitutional ideal in a country which is multi-religious such as ours? Right? Which is to say, you have to first reinforce what he wants you to critically analyze, then refute it also. Bring a sense of balance. There should be a 50-50 division. This is the only rule you have to keep, realistically speaking. Right? This was all that I had to say about answer writing. Right? I hope some myths have been cleared up now. Right? All right. So we'll end it up.